The story begins with Chris, an average man in every sense, except for one peculiar gift: he could learn anything instantly. Not a prodigy, not a genius, just someone who could grasp skills faster than anyone else. A jack of all trades, master of none. To make a name for himself, he joined the hero's party. His usefulness made him indispensable. He handled the overlooked tasks, the tedious details, the gaps others missed. For this, the world dubbed him the Great Extra. But before his potential could truly bloom, he met an early end. His death came with the beginning of the Age of Destruction. It all started when the Demon King of Carnage, a terrifying figure from the Magic Empire, launched an all-out war against the Dominion of Light. The so-called hero Evan wasn't strong enough to stop him. They lost. Just as everyone expected. The Dominion of Light fell. Before dying, Hero Evan made one last request. He asked Chris to take up the mantle of hero. He hoped, even prayed, for the chance to turn back time and make that wish reality. But Chris didn't share that dream. After a lifetime of struggle and disappointment, dying felt more like peace. A final escape from misery. Even if fate gave him a second chance, he thought it would be better to be reborn into a wealthy family. That was his last thought, right before he died, and woke up again. This time, he found himself in the body of a young master from the Magic Empire, the very empire that birthed the Demon King of Carnage. Specifically, he was now part of the Dark Magic Clan, one of the 12 elite clans that supported the empire. As fitting as the name sounded, it felt almost like a cruel joke. From what he could tell, he had regressed 15 years into the past, 5 years before the Age of Destruction would begin. Now, technically, he had what he always wanted: wealth, status, and comfort. But there was a catch. The person whose body he now inhabited was anything but fortunate. His new name? Christian van Baron Hazar. Chris remembered enough from his past life to understand the social structure. The Van in Christian's name marked him as a noble, belonging to a branch family. The house of Count Hazar was a major branch of Baron County, the ruling line of the Dark Magic Clan. Even as a branch, the Hazar family carried immense political power and wealth. They were untouchable, influential, feared. There wasn't a single fiend in the Magic Empire who didn't recognize the name. The family had two possible heirs. Christian, the eldest, was notorious for causing trouble, always in the wrong place at the wrong time, always creating chaos. His reputation made him a liability. And in this world, liabilities didn't last long. Chris soon realized the chilling truth. Christian was fated to die, murdered, by his own blood. This wasn't the fresh start Chris had dreamed of. All he'd ever wanted was a peaceful life in a rich family. No drama. No fighting. No apocalypse. But here he was, seconds away from being executed if he didn't figure something out. There were 2 years left before Christian's death was supposed to happen. According to what Chris knew, the Hazar family was obsessed with reputation. If they killed their own, it meant Christian had become too much of a stain to keep around. Which could only mean one thing. He had been utterly useless. Or worse, dangerous to their image. Chris figured his best move was to reinvent Christian. If he could act harmless, stay useful, and avoid stirring the pot, maybe he could survive. That was priority one. Not dying. Once that was out of the way, he started thinking bigger. With all this money and influence, he could actually live well, really well. But that comforting thought was cut short by a bitter memory. The Age of Destruction. The war that would begin in 5 years, led by the Demon King of Carnage. His goal was to sacrifice all of humanity to complete Ragnarok. By the time anyone understood his plan, it was already too late. Both the Dominion of Light and the Magic Empire were destroyed, caught in the storm of one man's ambition. If Chris truly wanted to survive, he'd have to stop it. That meant going far beyond just laying low. The Demon King of Carnage was too strong. Even without his army of fanatical fiends, he was nearly unbeatable. To defeat him, Chris would have to surpass him, and the only way to do that was to climb to the top, become the Demon Emperor himself. Rule the entire Magic Empire. 5 years. That was all the time he had. If he pulled it off, the Magic Empire would be his, and maybe then, he could stop the apocalypse. Later that day, Chris, now Christian, got a rude reminder of the mess he'd inherited. He was being scolded by the head of the house, his father. The man was furious that Christian had dared to leave his room, despite being grounded. He says that Christian had no right to show his face, not after the embarrassment he caused the family. He insists that Christian should be repenting, not walking around as if nothing happened. The anger was real. The disdain even more so. Count Hazar gives one final warning. He states that if there's even one more slip-up, the punishment will be death. His head severed from his body without hesitation. The aura he exudes is crushing, so intense that Chris finds himself trembling involuntarily. The pressure is enough to make a lesser man collapse. Swallowing his pride, Chris offers a sincere apology, admitting guilt for everything Christian had done until now. He isn't doing this out of fear. It's strategy. Chris wants to erase the disaster of a reputation Christian built, to replace it with something functional. Without that, he can't move forward with his plans. So he continues apologizing, hoping that some sliver of remorse might pierce through the Count's unyielding exterior. But Count Hazar remains unmoved. He makes it clear he has no reason to believe his son. After all, he's heard apologies before. Too many of them. And every time, they led to more disgrace. Meanwhile, Chris is desperately trying to piece together what Christian did to cause this complete breakdown of trust. There are too many scandals and disasters associated with the name Christian to even know which one triggered this level of hatred. To buy himself some ground, Chris reminds the Count that he suffered memory loss a few days ago. He says that since then, he has tried to recall his past behavior and realized just how shameful he had been. He fully admits to ruining his father's honor and bringing nothing but humiliation to the family name. Still, the Count's expression doesn't change. He has heard these lines before. Every excuse, every sob story. None of it ever led to real change. Seeing no other way, Chris offers something radical. He requests to be sent into the punishment cave and proposes to spend an entire month inside to prove his sincerity. The punishment cave, as it's known, is a prison built for high-ranking fiends. There's no light, and all 5 senses are stripped away. Within days, even the strongest minds break down into madness. Count Hazar doubts his son could last a few hours, let alone an entire month. Chris has already thought it through. It's dangerous, possibly lethal, but it's the only shot he has. He explains that if he can't change the Count's perception with words, then he'll prove it with action. Count Hazar considers it. He has watched Christian make grand declarations before, all of which ended in disaster. Still, he decides to entertain this one last gamble. He tells Chris that if he fails to come out a changed man after a month, he'll be banished from the clan. Chris understands the weight of that sentence. Banishment means death. Christian has made too many enemies. Without the clan's protection, they'll come for him. Mercilessly. Yet he accepts without hesitation. In return, he asks for a single favor should he succeed. The Count scoffs at his confidence. He agrees, but makes it clear he doesn't believe it will come to anything, not after all this time. Later, in the comfort of his lavish room, a servant arrives. The punishment cave has been prepared. The servant is Cox, the house butler, a half-vampire known for his quiet demeanor. Chris nods at the news and takes his time packing. A luggage bag over his shoulder, he begins the slow walk to the cave. As he moves through the corridors, servants whisper behind his back. They all think he's scheming again. Their minds go back to the latest scandal. How Christian had insulted the young lady of the poison magic clan so severely that Count Hazar had to personally bow in apology. It was a humiliation that still burns in everyone's memory. Now, everything makes sense, why the Count had been so vicious. Some servants begin placing bets, confident that Christian won't last more than 2 days in the cave. Chris overhears the chatter and smirks. He knows what they think, but he also knows they're about to be very wrong. At a distance, a younger figure watches quietly, his little brother, Thurn. When they arrive, the cave entrance is guarded by 2 Death Knights. They radiate menace, warning anyone nearby to keep their distance. But they don't stop Chris. Just as he's about to step inside, Thurn's voice breaks the silence. Thurn van Bar Hazar, Christian's younger brother, is a top student and a model heir. There's no time for a full introduction now because the next moment, Thurn lunges. His sword stops just a hair's width from Chris's eyes. Chris holds steady. Outwardly calm, though his soul nearly collapses from the shock. He asks what his brother thinks he's doing. Thurn says that he's just here to remind his older brother how useless and pathetic he is. He warns that if Christian drags the family name down any further, he may as well be dead. Watching this firecracker of a sibling, Chris makes a quiet judgment. He's convinced Thurn is the one who orchestrated Christian's death in the previous timeline. He remembers Thurn well from the Age of Destruction. A master of curse magic, even back then. Chris responds with a hard glare. It's enough to make Thurn flinch. Keeping up the act, Chris steps into the cave and shuts the door behind him. Thurn is left standing outside, seething. That defiance. That wasn't the brother he remembered. That look didn't belong to someone broken, it left him shaken. Inside the cave, Chris walks into absolute darkness. His vision gone, his hearing stolen, even his sense of smell and touch nearly erased. Only the faintest sensation remains in his fingertips. Just enough to feel what little he brought inside, enough to survive. The cave is designed to erase the mind, to make prisoners unravel. But Chris doesn't flinch. He's endured worse. In fact, this isolation is perfect for him. He plans to use this time to fix the mess that is his body. He needs complete focus, and the silence is a gift. Fixing this body will take effort. But he's done harder things. Back when they called him the Divine Hand, his medical skill was unmatched. With that knowledge and the modified bone compression technique he developed, he knows what to do. And now that he's rich, magic stones are finally within reach. He had assumed he'd never get his hands on them again, given their cost. But now, he has access to stones imbued with every kind of elemental property. He starts with a white magic stone. It will purge toxins from his body, a boring but necessary step. He'll need to guide the white mana carefully across his body to clean every trace of impurity. It's a delicate process. A single mistake could cause unbearable pain, but for Chris, this is nothing new. He performs the ritual calmly, almost effortlessly. Meanwhile, back in the grand halls of House Hazar, Count Hazar questions his butler about Christian. He wants to know if his son truly entered the punishment cave. The butler confirms it. He says that Christian walked in willingly, without resistance. He adds, almost with a grim certainty, that the boy will be so mentally shattered inside that cave he won't even be able to cry for help. These words don't ease the Count's mind. If anything, they weigh heavier on his conscience. He starts doubting his decision, silently wondering whether allowing Christian to enter that place was the right call. He reflects on the past, how Christian was once a promising child, full of potential. He questions where it all went wrong. Was it pride? Entitlement? Maybe his son's early talents fed into his ego and rotted his core. Regardless of what caused the downfall, the Count thinks to himself that it's better for Christian to die broken than to keep living as a disgrace to the family. Deep down, he wants to believe Christian's words. That there might be a sliver of change in him, but he's been burned too many times before. Slick talk and fake sincerity had long since lost their effect. Then he asks the butler if Christian brought anything with him into the cave. The butler hesitates, clearly uncomfortable. But under the Count's piercing gaze, he's forced to speak. He says that Christian carried several magic stones, among them dreamstones. The type that induces hallucinations. He admits that he's unsure what Christian is planning, but suggests they open the cave immediately just in case. The Count replies coldly with a hard no if Christian is scheming, then letting him rot inside is a fitting end. Any treachery will be answered with pain, not mercy. A full month passes. Count Hazar stands outside the cave entrance, his expression unreadable. He assumes the worst, convinced that whatever remained of his son inside would be a hollow shell. But his certainty shatters when Christian steps out, smiling. It's not just the fact that he survived, it's the look in his eyes. Sharp, alive. Not the dull, lifeless stare the Count had gotten used to seeing. For the first time in years, there's a spark of something real. Still, the Count holds back. 1 month in the cave doesn't erase a lifetime of failure. But Christian doesn't flinch. He promises that he'll keep proving himself, again and again if needed. The Count, believing his son barely made it through, has no idea what really happened inside. In truth, Christian thrived. He used the white mana stone to fuel his body and power his training non-stop. His goal was simple. Rebuild himself from the ground up, physically and mentally. The cave's total sensory deprivation worked in his favor, allowing him to channel his focus inward. But the true breakthrough came from the Dreamstone. Despite its narcotic effects, Christian used the hallucinations as mental sparring partners. The distortions of reality forced his mind to adapt faster, accelerating his transformation. In that altered state, he pushed beyond his limits and achieved something unheard of. He formed 2 energy cores within his body. He hid the light core deep within the dark one, a feat so rare and dangerous that exposure would cause a storm of reactions. But he wasn't done yet. He sensed a presence within the cave, someone hoping he would crumble. Instead, that pressure only sharpened his will. Back in the present, Christian wastes no time. He reminds his father of the promise, the favor owed. He asks for access to the Black Swamp Knight's training grounds. The Count reacts with visible irritation, calling it a foolish request. To him, Christian has no right to step foot near one of the 3 elite knight orders that uphold the dark magic plan. But Christian insists. He says that he's not asking to join the order, only to observe them. He believes that watching the best in action will be invaluable to his growth. After a moment's pause, the Count relents, but not without a harsh warning. If Christian embarrasses the family in front of the knights, death will follow. Christian accepts the condition without flinching. Before the Count leaves, he asks for one more favor. Later, Christian arrives at the training grounds. He keeps to himself, but the murmurs start instantly. The knights recognize him right away. They call him the failure of House Hazar, and don't bother hiding their contempt. In the Magic Empire, strength defines worth. Bloodlines don't mean much if you can't back them up. But Christian didn't come here just to soak in disdain. His goal is deeper. He wants access to the family library, specifically the grimoires containing dark magic. According to his father, he'll need a recommendation letter from Deputy Commander Melon before he can even step foot inside. Christian doesn't object to the rule, but he does find it odd. As an important member of the Hazar house, shouldn't the library be open to him by default? Still, he understands. This is another test, and he's ready to pass it. His father brings up one of Christian's most shameful moments, when he tried to sell the advanced grimoires on the black market. The memory is enough to make even Chris cringe. He starts to realize just how deep this hole of disgrace goes. If good for nothing were a title, Christian had worn it with dedication. Now, Chris has a new goal. Earn the deputy commander's recommendation. Without it, there's no access to the library, no learning dark magic, and no path forward. As he sizes up the training grounds, he spots several knights scattered across the field, and among them, the brat himself, Thurn. Thurn wastes no time. He starts spitting insults like it's a competitive sport. His remarks are sharp, laced with venom and superiority. Chris, used to the kid's attitude by now, initially finds it annoying. But then something clicks. This might actually work to his advantage. Thurn marches up and tells him to leave. He insists that Christian should be grateful for even surviving the punishment cave and shouldn't push his luck. But Chris, ever composed, responds with a smug look and casually mentions that their father personally gave him permission to be here. That comment makes Thurn shudder, unable to hide how much it unsettles him. Before the tension can build further, another figure enters the field. The temperature seems to drop instantly. Deputy Commander Melon arrives. Her glare could cut stone. The sheer pressure of her presence coats the air in 4-star level dark energy. It's a silent threat meant to scare Chris off the grounds and back to his hole. But he doesn't flinch. The calm in his eyes unsettles even her, as if he's either too bold or too broken to feel fear. Chris greets her with unwavering poise. He admits that he's made mistakes, acknowledges that trust won't come easy, but he declares that he's ready to prove his worth. He proposes a challenge. Let him fight one of the fiends here to earn his place. Melon, clearly unimpressed, rejects the idea. She claims it's laughable, but Chris doesn't back down. He politely asks her to stop trying to intimidate him with dark energy and instead allow a fair, unarmed duel. He explains that he's not yet capable of using dark energy effectively due to his, well, lifestyle choices. Melon eyes him cautiously. She repeats the question, asking if he's sure he can handle an unarmed fight. He says that he is, and that he wants to choose his opponent, Thurn. The air shifts. Thurn is livid. The idea that his disgrace of a brother would challenge him, a 2-star prodigy, is outrageous. Melon also thinks the choice is reckless. She reminds Chris that Thurn's reached a level most fiends don't touch until adulthood. Only a rare few hit 2-star by 13. But Chris insists. He says that fighting someone weaker would prove nothing. Facing someone stronger is the only way to make a point. He even throws in a taunt. If Thurn refuses, it'll say more about him than it ever could about Chris. Thurn, of course, takes the bait. Soon, a crowd forms. The two brothers step into the center of the training ground, surrounded by onlookers hungry for blood. Most are sure Thurn will wipe the floor with his brother. After all, the guy hasn't even awakened dark energy. Before they begin, Chris raises a question. How will the winner be decided? He suggests a fight until one of them surrenders. But Melon, still irritated, overrides that with a more brutal rule. The match will end only when one fighter is completely incapacitated. She wants Thurn to have a real chance to leave a lasting mark. Chris, however, is more concerned about hurting his opponent. The irony doesn't escape him. He doesn't want to go too far against his little brother. His hesitation only adds fuel to Thurn's fire. The boy launches himself forward, but Chris is faster. He starts with an open-handed slap, one that echoes across the field. The humiliation is instant. Thurn reels from it, both physically and emotionally. He tries to retaliate with a slap of his own, but Chris simply leans back and dodges it like it's nothing. In truth, this fight is stacked against Chris. On paper, it's suicide. No dark energy, no known strength, just him, barehanded. But this is where his experience kicks in. Years of battle, death, and bloodshed in his past life have sharpened his instincts beyond reason. And with the foundation he rebuilt in the punishment cave, he's not the same man he once was. If he measures just his purified state, he's already at 3-star level in raw capability. Thurn swings again, wild, clumsy. Chris ducks and slams his knee into Thurn's gut. The younger boy stumbles, stunned by the unexpected strength. Around them, the crowd goes quiet. This wasn't what they expected. Chris uses the pause to mock Thurn. He fires off jabs, playful insults that dig just deep enough to irritate. Watching his bratty brother squirm is strangely satisfying. Thurn, convinced something shady is going on, accuses him of cheating. Chris denies it flatly. There's no trick. He says Thurn's just weak. That one hits home. Thurn's pride takes a hit. Rage twists his face. Dark energy begins to rise from his fists, and he lunges forward, aiming to end the fight in one brutal strike. Chris dodges Thurn's punch with practiced ease. The younger boy doesn't relent. He launches a flurry of blows, wild and frantic, but not one of them lands. Chris weaves through the barrage effortlessly, studying every movement like a bored teacher grading a sloppy essay. Then, without warning, he parries a punch, cancels Thurn's dark energy mid-flow, and buries a brutal counterstrike into his stomach. The blow is so clean, so effective, that Thurn coughs up blood and collapses to the ground. Gasps ripple through the crowd. The fiends murmur, speculating that Thurn must have gone easy on his brother. Some suggest he held back out of pity. After all, there's no universe where Thurn, the prodigy, loses to the black sheep of the Hazar family. But Melon knows better. She's stunned into silence, the gears in her head spinning. She saw it all clearly. The technique, the timing, the precision. This wasn't luck or pity. This was skill. Chris turns toward her and calmly asks if he's proven himself now. She nods, still trying to process what just happened. He's earned the right to train here. For Christian, it's one more box ticked off. Later, alone in his room, Chris reflects on the fight and what came after. He's finally awakened to 1-star dark magic. It took longer than he wanted thanks to Christian's old chaotic energy polluting his system, but he's made it. As for wielding both dark and light magic together, he knows he'll need to climb further for that. His maid, Marie, enters after being summoned. She's not your typical maid, she's a banshee, a high-level evil spirit in a crisp uniform. Chris finds the entire thing off-putting. He even debates asking his father to replace her, but for now, he decides to endure. He tells her to bring him some juice before training. Marie tilts her head and asks if he'd like the blood-infused version, insisting it tastes far superior. She repeats the offer with a disturbing enthusiasm. Chris, trying to keep it together, insists on simple strawberry juice. Later, just as Chris is about to head out, the butler intercepts him. He expresses concern, saying that Christian has been overworking himself. He remarks that it's good to see such dedication, that he's proud of Christian's progress, even if others have dismissed him as hopeless. Chris isn't buying it. He glares at the butler, his expression ice cold. He doesn't want empty validation, especially from a servant who likely laughed behind his back. The butler quickly apologizes and withdraws, wishing him well. Something about the man feels off. Chris can't quite put his finger on it, but the unease lingers. As he walks the grounds, he notices a shift in the air. The servants and bystanders no longer sneer or avoid his gaze. Their expressions have softened. Some even nod subtly. Chris sees the opening and decides to push forward. Respect isn't given, it's taken. He drops his bag and starts training. Sword swings, footwork, breathing, each motion refined. A nearby fiend notices and hurries to report to Deputy Commander Melon that Christian's returned to the grounds. Melon listens with interest. She can't stop thinking about the way Christian fought Thurn. His movements were deliberate, accurate. The way he dispelled dark energy at the perfect time. It was master-level timing. She begins to wonder if he could eventually rival Lord Eshad Deberan, heir to the main family. But that thought feels ridiculous. Christian is a ruined vessel, a shadow of what he could have been. She walks outside to confirm for herself and finds Christian standing over another fallen opponent, Cannon, a 1-star fiend. The crowd is frozen in disbelief. Somehow, this bastard has reached 1 star. Even Melon stares in disbelief. Chris, meanwhile, is unimpressed. These so-called elite knights don't feel elite. He had expected challenge, not easy wins. He voices his disappointment aloud, mocking the skill level of the Black Swamp Knights. This insult doesn't sit well with the onlookers. A larger fiend, Torin, steps forward, boiling with rage. Chris gestures him forward with a grin. He's baiting them, and they're taking it. Torin attacks, and the duel begins. Steel clashes in a rhythmic, brutal exchange. Chris doesn't just fight, he learns. Every strike Torin throws, every shift in stance, Chris commits it to memory. He recognizes the flow and identifies the technique. Mud swordsmanship, a rare and secretive style. He decides to test it. Mimicking the technique, he lands a sharp strike across Torin's face. Just like that, the bigger fiend collapses. The crowd goes wild again. Even Melon can't deny it anymore. Christian's previous victories weren't flukes, this is real. Chris, however, remains disappointed. These knights were supposed to be legends. Instead, they're target dummies. He doesn't hold back, loudly blaming Melon for raising such mediocre warriors. Everyone watching tenses. No one insults Melon to her face and walks away unscathed, and she agrees. Furious, she draws her sword and brings it down with enough force to rupture the ground beneath her. Her dark energy floods the area, screaming danger. It's a show of power meant to remind everyone who the real monster is. Chris acknowledges her strength. He says that yes, she would easily crush him if she were allowed to go all out. But then he points out the rules. Dark magic can only be used against 1-star opponents. Since he's only 1 star, she can't use full magic on him. He proposes they settle this with wooden swords. Melon agrees, smirking. She's confident she can still reduce him to a puddle with nothing but wood. No more words. The duel begins. She attacks first, her sword coming down with lethal precision. Chris blocks. The clash rings out, loud and sharp. They move with speed too fast for spectators to follow. But despite the odds, Chris holds his ground. He parries every strike, answers every attack. Melon starts to sweat. None of her blows are landing. It's the same pattern as before, just like with Thurn, just like with Torin. Her frustration builds. Chris taunts her with a cocky grin. Melon, now fully pissed, channels her rage, breaks the rule, and swings with dark energy flooding her blade. But Chris is already moving. He dodges the empowered strike and lunges. His head crashes into her face with brutal force. Her nose explodes on impact. It's a risk, but it pays off. He realized in that split second that with Melon's dark magic restricted, she couldn't rely on brute force alone to guard her vulnerabilities. His hunch was spot on. If she had been a swordswoman pure and simple, the tactic might have failed. But she wasn't. So when he charged forward and cracked his head against hers, catching her off guard and even managing to draw a scratch on her neck, she didn't react with fury or shame. Instead, Melon burst into laughter, raw and unexpected. She said that she found it ridiculous in the best way, claiming she never imagined a headbutt would be Christian's next move. Then she acknowledged him. For the first time, she admitted she was wrong to look down on him and declared that from now on, she'd give him the personal attention he clearly deserved to accelerate his growth. But Chris wasn't done. He revealed that during the headbutt, he intentionally scratched her neck, and if he'd used poison, she'd already be dead. The smile on her face froze, but she didn't protest. She accepted the outcome and declared her defeat. She even promised to fulfill any wish he had. Christian saw the opportunity and immediately proposed another duel in the future. Melon agreed without hesitation, but then he added a condition. He wanted her to kneel before him. That request hit like a thunderclap. Melon stiffened. Her loyalty belonged to House Baron, the ruling line of the Dark Magic clan. Kneeling to a branch member, especially to someone like Christian, was unthinkable. She made that clear. But Chris answered her implication with a confident smirk. He said that soon, it wouldn't matter, because he intended to lead the clan himself. Melon stared at him, stunned, and called his claim delusional. 5 young lords were already recognized as successors, all direct heirs. Christian, a bastard from a branch family, had no chance. But Chris reminded her that the rules never stated a branch member couldn't become a young lord. Their rematch, he said, would happen in a month. No restrictions. A real fight. Melon agreed. She was already picturing how satisfying it would be to crush his ambitions. Chris warned her not to get too confident. The future was unpredictable, after all. With that, he walked away. Soon after, Christian stood before Count Hazar and handed him the letter of recommendation from Melon. Along with it, he offered some brutal feedback on the knight's fundamentals and suggested they restructure their training methods. The Count listened in silence. Earlier, Melon had already reported the full truth to the Count. She had described how Christian, despite his rank, defeated seasoned 1-star fiends with ease and how she herself had been caught off guard. She confessed to enjoying their fight and acknowledged the potential hidden beneath the filth of Christian's past. Now, standing in the present moment, Count Hazar simply stared at his son. For a moment, it was as if he didn't recognize the person in front of him. Then, in a rare gesture, he extended his hand and handed over the key to the family library. With the cold metal in his palm, Christian felt a wave of satisfaction. Not only had he earned the key, but he had also cracked open Melon's defenses. She wasn't fully on his side yet, but he knew she would be. In the age of destruction, Melon had been a 6-star fiend, an elite, and if he wanted to take control of the clan, she was a necessary ally. As he walked away from the estate's inner halls, he remembered the look on Count Hazar's face. A rare mixture of confusion and pride. That expression stuck with him. Even fiends, he realized, weren't devoid of paternal instincts. In that moment, Chris silently promised to make his father proud. Inside the ancient library, Christian explored shelves packed with forbidden knowledge, grimoires outlawed in the Dominion of Light. Blood magic, summoning rituals, curse theory, they were all here. He reached for one, and the second his hand made contact, a figure popped up beside him. Marie. His undead maid, now suddenly appearing out of nowhere, gave him a minor heart attack. She casually explained that she used to be the librarian here, which somehow didn't make him feel better. She also mentioned, as if commenting on the weather, that she had feelings for Christian. He didn't reciprocate, and she knew it, but it didn't stop her from flirting, much to his growing discomfort. Shifting gears, she commented on the grimoire he'd picked. Binding Seal, a 4-star spellbook. She questioned how he planned to comprehend it. Chris puffed out his chest and said that he was a genius. Marie, clearly not buying it, still played along and praised him. When she asked why he picked that particular grimoire, he answered vaguely. He said he was hunting a rat. Back in the training yard, Chris ran drills alongside the other fiends. He used the repetition as mental space to analyze his suspects. Thurn, his brat of a little brother, was first on the list. He hated Christian more than anyone. Second was Cox, the ever-helpful butler. Despite not being of noble blood, he had free access to places like the Punishment Cave. That was already suspicious, but what really drew Christian's attention was the Dreamstone Cox had slipped him before the cave, an item practically designed to drive fiends insane. There could be a third player pulling strings behind the scenes, but Christian needed a plan to draw them out, so he decided to act like the old Christian again. The bastard everyone expected him to be. He abruptly stopped his training mid-session and threw a tantrum, shouting about how hard everything was. Then he stormed off, declaring he was done for the day. The act worked. Confusion flickered across the faces of the other fiends. That evening at dinner, he pushed harder. He acted rude, childish, and obnoxious. Count Hazar's disappointment was visible. The old man stood silently for a moment, then stormed off without saying a word. Chris felt a flicker of guilt, but reminded himself this was for the greater good. Soon, rumors began to spread that Christian had relapsed into his old ways. Whispers about him bullying the maids, wasting coin on nonsense, and turning to alcohol once again filled the halls. His maid, though, wasn't having it. Every time he demanded wine, she replaced it with fruit juice. Chris tried to explain that he needed real alcohol for the act, but she was adamant. In between the charade, he made progress. He mastered the binding seal spell, catching even Marie off guard. She was genuinely stunned that he'd managed it so quickly. Chris, of course, couldn't resist bragging. He claimed he'd been studying in secret the entire time while pretending to be a delinquent. But the celebration didn't last. Thurn barged into his room uninvited. Seeing his brother, Christian didn't miss a beat. He instantly dropped the mask of genius and shifted into his degenerate act, slurring his words, reeking of fake alcohol, and playing the role of a wasted disgrace. The performance was flawless. Just what the rat needed to see. Thurn's eyes narrowed, a mix of disgust and frustration flashing through them as he watched his older brother stagger and slur like the same pathetic mess he had always been. His clenched jaw and scornful glare made it clear, he truly believed Christian hadn't changed at all. And that was exactly what Chris needed to see. That reaction, so raw and unfiltered, was all the proof Chris required. If Thurn had been part of the schemes targeting him, he would have been more cautious, more guarded. But this was pure, honest hate. It cleared Thurn as a suspect. With that confirmation, Chris decided to share a sliver of truth. He told Thurn there was a traitor within the house, someone plotting his downfall. For now, he planned to act like the reckless embarrassment everyone expected, to lure the real rat out into the open. To support his claim, he handed over the wine he'd been drinking, letting Thurn smell it for himself. No alcohol. Just juice, an illusion to sell the role. Though he still hadn't identified the mastermind, Chris was closing in. Right then, a servant burst in, drawn by the sound of shattered glass. Chris immediately snapped back into his drunken act, shouting at the poor soul and accusing him of bringing the wrong wine. He ordered the servant to relay a message to the butler. He wanted the proper bottle immediately. The servant, shaken, said that Cox was busy. That was all the excuse Chris needed. Slurring like a seasoned drinker, he declared he would confront the butler himself. Thurn could only watch, dumbfounded by the performance. The bozo act was so convincing it almost fooled him again. When Chris found Cox, he didn't waste time. He appended the wine bottle, drenching the butler. He accused him of messing with the order and demanded he fetch the correct wine himself. Cox, maintaining an eerie calm, apologized and said the proper wine would be sent shortly. Chris insisted he did personally. Cox resisted at first, saying he had more pressing matters to deal with, but Chris kept pushing, prodding for a slip. Eventually, Cox relented and left. The moment he was gone, Chris rifled through the stack of documents left on the table. His eyes lit up as he uncovered irregularities. Signs of embezzlement. It wasn't enough to prove Cox was the rat, but it added fuel to the fire. When Cox returned, Chris resumed the drunkard act, accepting the wine with exaggerated gratitude. He asked, in a mocking tone, if Cox was upset. The butler remained composed, insisting he was happy to serve. Before leaving, Cox relayed a curious message. Christian's old friends were waiting for him at their usual hideout. He also advised Chris to avoid them, claiming they were bad news. Naturally, that only made Chris more curious. At the hideout, the scene was lavish. The table was filled with food, and the guests, two bloated fiends, lounged like pigs. Chris's attention, though, was drawn to the maid serving drinks. She was clearly terrified. Chris muttered to himself about the disgusting display, how they'd forced this poor girl to pour drinks for their greedy hands. When she handed him a glass, something about it felt wrong. Without pause, he splashed the wine into the face of the fat bastard nearest to him and accused them of spiking his drink. Before chaos could erupt, he used dark magic to knock the maid unconscious. He didn't want her seeing what came next. The room froze. No one had expected Christian to wield such magic, not the good-for-nothing they knew. Before they could react, Chris slammed both men face first into the table. Blood spattered across the plates. The fat one barked questions, asking why he was attacked. Chris, unfazed, pulled out a dagger and made it clear. He wasn't here to play nice. After a bit of pressure, the skinny one cracked. He admitted they were being blackmailed by someone who supplied them with drugs. The plan was to murder the maid and pin it on Christian. Chris demanded a name. The skinny fiend hesitated until Chris reminded him who held the knife. Then, with fear in his voice, he confessed. The one behind it all was Cox. The two fiends begged for their lives, swearing they'd follow any order if he let them live. Chris made them promise. Twice. Then, just to be safe, he locked them in place with a binding seal. The next day, Cox rushed to Count Hazar. His report was dramatic. He claimed Christian had gotten drunk and murdered the maid before dumping her body into the river. The Count, furious and disgusted, ordered that Christian be brought to the Fiend Court at once. In the courtroom, Christian maintained his composure. He pleaded not guilty and calmly stated that the murder never happened. The Count demanded evidence, saying the testimony would prove his guilt. Chris responded with a twist no one saw coming. He gestured to the door. And in walked the maid, alive, unhurt, and very much not dumped in a river. Gasps erupted. The two conspirators began to sweat bullets, realizing they'd been set up. The maid testified, revealing that Christian had escorted her home safely and even given her money to help pay rent. She pointed at the real culprits. The two fiends who now stood shaking in place. To seal their fate, Chris activated the binding seal. The two men, trapped by the spell, confessed everything. They admitted to lying, said the murder was fake, and that butler Cox was behind the entire scheme. Cox, as expected, lost it. He stammered, begged, denied, and twisted his words in desperation. Chris had seen it coming. He turned to his father and requested to temporarily assume the Count's authority, just for one question. He swore that this question alone would reveal the truth. The Count agreed but warned him that any misuse of power would result in its immediate revocation. With that, Chris took the judge's seat and prepared to face the man who had orchestrated it all. Cox was placed in the defendant's stand. Now, the mask was coming off. The courtroom fell silent as Chris stood and asked the defendant, Cox, to swear he would speak only the truth. Cox did as instructed, repeating the oath twice, though his voice held the stiffness of a man with no other option. Chris had planned this from the beginning. The moment the second oath left Cox's lips, Chris activated the binding seal. Gasps spread across the courtroom like wildfire. Whispers broke out. No low-ranked brat should have the ability to cast 4-star dark magic. The spell etched itself into the air, binding Cox in glowing chains of arcane script. What no one else knew was that Chris had reworked the binding seal. With the right conditions, he could cast it at a much lower rank. The trick was simple. He just needed his targets to swear twice. Now it made sense why he'd made the two fiends swear twice before. Same trick, same trap. With Cox locked under the spell, Chris began his questioning. He demanded to know why Cox had hired those goons to ruin his reputation. Cox resisted. The seal tightened. His mind felt like it was being scorched from the inside. He held out, barely, but eventually broke, admitting that he was acting on orders. He confessed that someone had coerced him, using the threat of exposing his financial crimes. Chris pushed further. He asked if the crimes in question were indeed the embezzlement he'd discovered in the butler's documents. Cox confirmed this through gritted teeth, barely holding himself together under the pressure of the binding spell. The next question was the real prize. Chris asked who had issued the orders. Cox tried to resist again. The pain escalated to the point of no return. At last, he screamed out the name, Sir Eshid. Shock tore through the room. Sir Eshid the Baron, second son of the Dark Magic clan, had been pulling the strings. The implications were massive. Cox, now trembling, said that revealing this information had sealed his fate. Eshid would kill him without hesitation. Chris didn't give him the chance. Without a word, he stepped forward and severed Cox's head from his shoulders in one clean motion. Blood pooled across the floor as the silence returned. Everyone stared in disbelief. Before the murmurs could begin, Chris addressed the room. He reminded them that he had acted under authority granted by Count Hazar. The punishment was lawful. The Count, still composed, asked his son why he believed execution was the only appropriate response. Chris explained that if Cox were kept alive, the main family would likely fabricate evidence, twist the story, and cover the tracks. Eshid's betrayal would vanish under layers of lies, and House Hazar would be powerless to stop it. Now that the courtroom had been flipped upside down, Count Hazar summoned a portal, and he and Chris stepped through to the clan's secret training grounds. It was time for a conversation away from prying eyes. The Count, weary from everything he'd just witnessed, began to piece things together. He suspected that Eshid's actions were fueled by the ongoing succession conflict. Power in the Dark Magic clan wasn't just inherited, it was earned through allegiance and control. Each noble house stood behind a candidate, and Eshid clearly saw Christian as a threat. The Count said that he'd been leaning toward supporting the first young lady for succession, as the first young lord was out of the picture. But that's when Chris made his move. He announced his intention to become a successor himself. The Count didn't take it seriously. He told Christian that while, on paper, anyone from a branch family could qualify, no such thing had ever happened. It was unrealistic. Chris countered with one simple point. If Eshid was willing to orchestrate his murder, then he clearly already viewed him as a threat. That alone proved he had potential. The Count admitted that as children, Christian had once shown greater promise than Eshid, but time had passed. Eshid now stood miles ahead. Chris disagreed. He claimed he was already closing the gap, and fast. To prove it, he asked his father to use his authority to recommend him for the sacred dark rite, a brutal rite of passage that only qualified 2-star fiends could undergo. The Count reminded him that Christian hadn't even reached 2-star yet. Chris promised he would. He gave himself 2 months to hit the requirement and swore to surpass it. With no room to argue, the Count reluctantly accepted. Rumors spread like wildfire. Servants whispered about Christian's change, how the Count had begun training him personally. They spoke of how the sessions were so brutal that even seasoned knights would have collapsed. And Christian, he just kept getting stronger. On the training field, Chris moved like a storm. He demonstrated new techniques, slicing through dummies with pinpoint precision. The Count watched from the sidelines, stunned. It wasn't just talent, it was growth. Rapid, explosive, terrifying growth. Chris didn't just rely on what he learned, he innovated. He blended mud swordsmanship with the raw edge of black scythe energy, forming a hybrid technique that cut through obstacles like paper. It was a level of swordplay mud swordsmanship alone could never achieve. The Count stood frozen, watching his son dismantle dummy after dummy. The boy's understanding of combat, of magical flow, of weapon mechanics, it defied everything he thought possible. And then Chris cast a curse while mid-swing. The Count blinked. That wasn't possible. Even elite warriors struggled to maintain curse flow while channeling 2 sword styles at once. Chris turned, smiled, and shrugged as if it were no big deal. For him, it wasn't. 15 days into his training, Christian lay flat on the ground, completely gassed. Swordsmanship? Easy. Complex techniques? Not a problem. But cardio? Absolute hell. No matter how skilled he was with a blade, stamina had no shortcuts. It had to be earned, drop by sweaty drop. As he struggled to catch his breath, Deputy Commander Melon appeared, casually stepping into his misery like it was a garden stroll. She reminded him, with a knowing smile, that their long-awaited duel was fast approaching. Her voice carried that subtle mix of amusement and anticipation, as if she couldn't wait to crush him again. Though Christian was making rapid progress, Melon didn't think it was enough to close the gap between them. She made it clear. His dream of seeing her kneel was just that, a dream. But Chris, still wiping sweat from his brow, didn't seem discouraged. He wasn't chasing fantasy. He was building it. Melon admired his grit, even if it was premature. She praised his spirit and told him to keep pushing. She wanted the best version of him, if only to enjoy the thrill of dismantling him herself. To put their levels into perspective, Melon was currently an upper 4-star fiend, while Christian had only reached upper 1 star. Each star had 3 tiers, lower, middle, upper. The gulf between them was massive. But Christian wasn't worried. He had a plan. Later that day, he met up with Marie, his cursedly beautiful banshee maid. She looked stunning, too stunning. This was their first outing together, and she had clearly treated it like a date. She'd even gone all out with her outfit. Chris pointed out that he never invited her. All he'd said was to pack his bags, but Marie acted like he'd proposed an engagement. He had tried asking his father to switch her out for a human maid, but Count Hazar had simply reminded him of their contract. A high-tier banshee couldn't be left unsupervised. And the only way to cancel the pact was, unfortunately, through a deep kiss. So, that was off the table. Back in the present, Chris again told her that she couldn't come. They were heading into a crowded area, and her spiritual aura had a bad habit of making people faint. Marie immediately pulled out the sobbing routine, complete with trembling lips and watery eyes. She whined about not having seen the outside world in decades, and how lonely she was. After 5 minutes of non-stop guilt-tripping, Chris finally gave in, on the condition she kept her distance from everyone. Instantly, the act dropped. Marie brightened like a flower in bloom, strutting confidently at his side as if none of the drama had just happened. As they walked, she asked what the outing was for. He told her it was about turning a profit. Marie tilted her head and reminded him that she was carrying a bag full of gold coins. She dramatically dumped them into his hands to make her point. Chris, annoyed, told her it wasn't enough, and demanded she put the money back. Still curious, she guessed that he might be after more gold, maybe land or businesses. Every guess was wrong. As they reached the carriage, Chris encountered an unexpected third wheel, his little brother, Thurn. The kid had shown up, claiming he wanted to keep an eye on him in case he reverted to his scumbag self. And just to make things even weirder, Thurn casually announced that he intended to learn gambling. He wanted to build an empire, like a demon version of the Tate brothers. In demon society, gambling wasn't taboo. It was practically a noble art, endorsed by the king himself. Thurn insisted on tagging along, saying someone had to keep Christian in check. Chris couldn't help but tease him for it, watching with amusement as his younger brother puffed up with pride and irritation. Thurn swore he'd beat him at his own game, which only made Chris more excited. He was planning to absolutely fleece the kid. Their destination was glamorous, opulent walls, glowing lanterns, velvet curtains. Thurn and Marie were both stunned. To help them blend in, Chris handed out elaborate masks and gave Marie a private mission that Thurn wasn't privy to. Then, he told his little brother to follow his lead. Inside, they were immediately sized up. New faces meant fresh meat for the con artists. Christian could feel the vultures circling. He decided to spice things up by challenging Thurn to a bet. Whoever made more money in an hour would get to assign the loser a humiliating title. Thurn, being all ego and no caution, accepted right away. Chris even prepared a long, absurd title for Thurn to call him after his inevitable loss. Thurn stormed off with fire in his eyes. Chris got to work. His first game, easy win. But he knew how these dens operated. They let you win early to bait you into betting big. Then they flipped the table on you. He was ready. Thurn wasn't. The kid kept losing, falling for every trap. Chris, of course, didn't help. He threw in snide remarks and distractions, further messing with Thurn's concentration. Thurn, frustrated and red-faced, refused to back down. As they argued over how much Thurn had lost, Chris noticed something. The dealers had locked onto Thurn. Their eyes gleamed with greed. They had marked him as an easy target. Despite Christian's warning, Thurn stormed off for another round, and deep down, Chris was fine with that. This was the setup he'd been waiting for. Some time passes, and as expected, Thurn continues to hemorrhage cash like a leaking faucet. By the end of his spectacular losing streak, the poor kid has blown through a solid 10,000 rupees. Meanwhile, Marie, who had gone invisible to scout the area, quietly finishes mapping out the entire network of conmen operating inside the den. The whole operation is rigged, just as Chris had anticipated. After the chaos winds down, Chris takes his leave and makes his way to a high-end merchant hall. The staff, upon seeing him arrive without notice, are visibly shaken. Without wasting a second, Chris demands to speak with the merchant in charge. That would be Grantle, the infamous shark of the merchant guild. Officially, he's known as a respected trader, but behind the curtain, he's also the hidden owner of the very gambling den that drained Thurn dry. Grantle greets the young lord with a smile, but Chris is already cutting straight to the accusation. He calls him out for orchestrating the scam that targeted his brother. Grantle attempts to deflect, saying he has no control over what the employees do and that he merely owns the building. But then Marie speaks. Her voice alone is enough to send Grantle dropping to his knees. She tells him she could end his existence in less time than it takes to blink, and the man takes her word for it. Panicking, he begs for mercy and offers compensation to smooth things over. Exactly what Chris wanted. He demands 1 million rupees in damages. Grantle, shocked by the audacity of the demand, confesses they don't even keep that much cash on site, so Chris drops the figure, 200,000 rupees instead. That, at least, is doable. Grantle agrees, albeit painfully, and Chris makes one final request before leaving. Scene shift. Cut to the aftermath. Chris is now the proud owner of a mountain of high-grade combat equipment, all purchased using Grantle's apology. Among his new gear is a weapon of legend, the Holy Sword Grenade. Forged from the sacrifice of a hero's soul, it once stood as a beacon for demons, even during the hero's corruption. Now, it's little more than a relic gathering dust. But Chris has plans for it. Before leaving the merchant district, he surprises Marie by handing her a beautiful pendant she had secretly been eyeing earlier. He clarifies, emphatically, that it doesn't mean anything romantic. Marie, however, is left speechless. Since her death, no one has ever given her a gift. The moment hits her hard. Overwhelmed, she offers to make him even more of his favorite strawberry juice, this time with extra care. Which sounds sweet, until she casually drops the bomb that the juice he's been drinking all along already contains a trace of blood. Chris stares at her, silently begging the universe that this is some messed up joke. And then he remembers, he forgot something, or rather, someone. Thurn. Back at the gambling den, Thurn looks like he just walked out of a war zone, broke, bitter, and with only 1 rupee to his name. Apparently, he came within an inch of being sold as a slave, if not for someone recognizing his noble bloodline. When Christian strolls in, well-rested and carefree, Thurn loses it. He rages about being abandoned and nearly sold off like cheap goods. Chris simply reminds him, he lost a bet, and it's time to pay up. The horror dawns on Thurn as he recalls the full consequences. He now has to address his older brother by the name, Honorable King Emperor Majesty Big Brother. The shame hits him like a truck. He tries saying it out loud and nearly chokes on the embarrassment. Chris, of course, lives for this. He makes Thurn repeat it, soaking in the delicious humiliation. Thurn storms off, swearing to one day flip the tables. But let's be real, Chris doubts that day will ever come. Still, deep down, he knows the story's not over. One day, he'll die at the hands of this same boy. Not because Thurn wants it, but because someone else does. Chris knows Eshid's fingerprints are all over his future death. Eshid, son of Langham and golden child of the main family, is the highest-ranked heir of the dark magic clan. If Christian rises, Eshid will see him as a rival. And even though Chris isn't the real Christian, the body he's in is destined to cross paths with that monster. His revenge will come, but not yet. For now, he shifts focus to Grenade. This holy relic had endured generations of users, trials, and battles, but no one had tamed it. Its blade had rejected countless hands, especially those tainted with darkness. Chris grips the hilt. The blade responds with a flash of resistance, sparking his hand with a jolt of light-based energy. As expected, it doesn't like him. His dark mana clashes violently with its holy nature. But Chris grins. He says he doesn't care if the sword hates him. He'll figure it out. It's just a matter of deciphering its internal mana pattern. Then, with zero hesitation, he starts hammering the blade. Literally. Blow after blow, he pounds it like a man possessed. He's not repairing it. He's threatening it. Forcing it to respond, to yield. He declares, loud and clear, that he's got time, all the time, to beat the soul out of this weapon until it bows. Somewhere in the spiritual core of the weapon, something trembles. Even Grenade is shaking. A few days had gone by when Chris arrived at the training grounds expecting to meet his father. Instead, his attention locked onto a striking woman standing nearby, someone oddly familiar. The moment of recognition hit him like a bolt. This wasn't just anyone. It was Marion, the commander of the Black Shadow Knights, known for her beauty, her severity, and her cold, commanding presence. She had a legacy as deep as her glare. The daughter of the Elder Clan's leader, the head of the feared Dark Magic Clan, and, notably, the older sister to both Count Hazar and Langham. Marion wasn't just a decorated warrior, she was a walking fortress, bodyguard to the Elder Clan's head and handler of the clan's most dangerous missions. To Chris, she appeared as the highest-tier operative alive, untouchable, intimidating, and, above all, terrifyingly elite. This only deepened his curiosity. What was someone like her doing here? Count Hazar broke the tension by informing Chris that Marion's visit wasn't casual. She had come to discuss the Cox incident. She had concerns about Chris's choice to end Cox's life so rashly and intended to clean up the mess he'd left behind. This didn't sit well with Chris. He suspected she might be siding with Eshid and muttered sarcastically that it was amusing for such a prestigious figure to concern herself with something so minor. Marion corrected him with cold finality. She wasn't here for Cox. She was here for him. That flipped a switch in Chris's mind. He thought, maybe, this was his chance, his moment to prove himself to the Elder Clan's head. But Marion crushed that idea before it could grow. She stated bluntly that it was absurd for someone with the strength of a mere two-star warrior to even think about challenging someone like Melon. She even advised calling off the match entirely. Chris, however, wasn't about to back down. He revealed his trump card. Full control over Grenade, the legendary holy sword. Marion was stunned. She turned on her brother, furious that he hadn't told her the full truth about his son. She said Chris was clearly more troublesome than she'd been led to believe. She hadn't expected him to resort to wielding such a sacred weapon. Chris smirked and asked whether he wasn't allowed to use it, reminding her that all he cared about was victory, regardless of the means. Marion responded that not even the Elder Clan head had ever subdued Grenade, and for someone like Chris to try was pure arrogance. She warned that he would only bring about his own destruction. To challenge her pride, Chris pulled the sword from its sheath, displaying total mastery. Marion initially accused him of trickery, or perhaps using a fake. But as soon as she gripped the sword, searing pain shot through her hand, forcing her to hurl it aside in shock. The weapon burned her, while Chris held it effortlessly. When pressed for an explanation, Chris simply said the reason he could do it was because he was a genius. His father was visibly impressed, though before any further reaction could follow, Melon made her entrance, stepping into the conversation. She acknowledged his control over the blade, but warned him that it wouldn't change the outcome of their match. She declared that today would be his last. Their fight exploded into motion. Melon struck first, her blade crashing down with overwhelming force. Chris was immediately on the defensive. Her strength and speed were nothing like before, no restraints, no limits. Though his confidence faltered, Chris held his ground. As their blades clashed again and again, Grenade's divine nature began disrupting Melon's dark weapon. But even more astonishing was Chris's skill. He wasn't just surviving, he was pushing her back. Count Hazar watched with disbelief. How could his son keep up? Marion provided the answer. She explained that Chris was adjusting the demonic energy within him in real time, keeping the holy sword from damaging him while still fighting at full capacity. It was an intricate and dangerous balancing act, one that took immense discipline and understanding. Breaking the rhythm, Melon paused to ask if Chris was attempting to read her movements. He casually remarked that he had sharp eyes. He explained that all attacks begin with motion, shoulders, elbows, the body gives signals before a strike. Whether novice or expert, that truth remained unchanged. Melon decided to switch tactics. She cast a binding spell that caught Chris in place. She reminded him that she wasn't just a warrior, she was also a mage. But Chris wasn't fazed. He broke the spell with ease, crediting a magical artifact his father had unknowingly given him. Count Hazar had no memory of that gift, and Chris admitted that he'd stolen it, skillfully, of course. He emphasized that one's gear was a reflection of their talent. To prove it, he launched an orb into the air, which burst in a spectacular explosion. Melon's focus shifted to that, just as the real orb struck from another angle, engulfing her in flames. But it wasn't enough. She emerged from the inferno, blade still sharp, and slashed at Chris. He blocked the strike, and shattered her weapon in the process. From the ruins of the attack, Melon laughed. She was thrilled. She declared that she was enjoying herself far too much. Her wild grin and burning energy startled even Marion, who sensed how dangerous Melon had become in her frenzy. Chris stayed calm. Using her overexertion, he maneuvered around and placed grenade at her neck. The match was over. Melon was shocked, Marion disheartened, and Count Hazar deeply impressed. Instead of reacting with anger or denial, Melon laughed again. She said that the entire battle had been one long message from Chris. She understood. Chris reminded her of their deal and asked if she still wished to serve him. He assured her that if not, he would respect her choice. Melon asked if staying by his side meant more thrilling duels. Chris promised her there would be countless battles ahead. She agreed, officially becoming his ally. Later, Marion reflected on everything she'd witnessed, particularly the flawless way Chris had managed the dark energy inside him. She couldn't forget how even her master had failed to handle grenade for more than a few seconds. Yet here was Chris, wielding it with ease. To master the holy sword, one must constantly shift and fine-tune the flow of dark energy within, evading the weapon's natural rejection. In theory, it's a concept that sounds manageable. In combat, though, it's nearly impossible. Even the Elder Clan's head had once remarked that perhaps only the demon of Gehenna or the demonic dragon could accomplish such a feat. Or maybe, some foolish prodigy with an unnatural grasp of dark magic. And Chris, Marion thinks, just might be that fool. After witnessing his performance in battle, she starts to consider that her father's long-held wish might finally be within reach. The next scene unfolds in a kitchen, where an intimidating orc chef is meticulously crafting a strawberry cake. His culinary precision is impressive, and Chris watches curiously as the chef questions what brings the young master to his domain today. Chris explains that he wants to bake cookies for someone. This instantly rouses the jealousy of his eccentric maid, who grumbles about the possibility of him having a girlfriend. Chris dismisses her suspicions and insists that he'll do the baking himself, even though the chef offers to handle it. As Chris speaks, he's suddenly splashed with a mess of strawberry mush. Around him, orc sous chefs are brutalizing the berries, pounding them with such aggression that Chris questions if they're harvesting blood, not fruit. Later, Chris visits Marion to see her off before she leaves. He presents her with a neatly wrapped gift, cookies, handmade with care. Marion is visibly touched. She savors the treat, and Hazar suddenly understands why Chris had asked him about her favorite snack days prior. The boy had planned this gesture down to the smallest detail. Marion is surprised to learn that Chris personally baked the cookies. As she bites into one, the taste overwhelms her. She says that they're perfect. That's exactly what Chris wanted to hear. As thanks for the thoughtful gift, Marion offers to grant him a request. Chris seizes the moment and asks her to become his true aunt, not just by blood, but in allegiance. Marion senses the hidden layers in his words and immediately recalls his upcoming role in the Dark Rite ritual. She realizes that what he's truly seeking is her support in the succession conflict. She tells him that she can't offer him help in that regard. The representatives of the main family are bound by a strict rule. They must remain impartial in the struggle for succession. That's non-negotiable. Chris insists that he's not chasing influence. He claims he simply wants to be closer to her. His sincerity is so exaggerated that it could win him an award, and Marion finds herself taken in by his charm. She decides she likes his boldness, and his baking, and requests another batch of cookies for her next visit. Count Hazar, watching the scene unfold, gets emotional, wiping away a tear as he sees his son actually trying his hardest. Chris keeps the act alive, joking that his baking will fall off if his aunt doesn't support him. Marion, smiling, responds by officially inviting him to join the Black Shadow Knights. She explains that his battle against Melon showed her that his potential may exceed even that of the Elder Clan's head. But she warns that before that power is realized, many rivals will try to break him. Marion expresses concern for the dark road ahead, but Chris replies that even if he dies, he's determined to conquer whatever stands in his way. Despite offering him a place in her elite unit, she sees that he already believes in his victory. His confidence borders on recklessness, but she recognizes something different in him, something that sets him apart, so she doesn't stop him. Before departing, Marion mounts her horse and offers a warning. She tells him to watch out for the first young lady, Julienne. On the surface, she appears kind and gentle, but Marion claims that Julienne is even more dangerous than Eshid. She says Chris will understand why, soon enough. Chris thanks her for the advice and bids her farewell. As she rides off, Marion reflects on the boy. He may be reckless, but her impression of him has shifted. She sees something in him now. Later, in his room, Chris finds himself deep in thought. His father and Marion are both formidable 6-star warriors, yet neither has shared much about their roles during the Great War. With how powerful the Magic Empire had been, he assumes their contributions must have been significant. Still, he's not interested in repeating history. What he wants now is power, more of it. In the next scene, Count Hazar summons Chris for a private talk. What shocks him most is realizing his son has already reached the 2-star level. It's taken him only a month to achieve it. Chris shrugs off the astonishment and reminds his father that he's built differently. Hazar shifts the topic. He explains that the main house was informed about the participation of both Thurn and Chris in the Sacred Dark ritual. However, only Thurn was approved. Chris, due to his disgraceful reputation, wasting family resources and behaving recklessly, was denied. Chris takes the news like a punch to the gut. His expression crumbles under the weight of the rejection. But just as he's reeling from the blow, Hazar surprisingly speaks in support of his son. Chris pulls himself together and asks if Langham was behind the decision. Hazar informs him it wasn't. Both father and son suspect another figure, Loin de Baron, a direct descendant of the main house and the star of the upcoming ceremony. The Holy Dark ceremony isn't a simple tradition. It involves candidates channeling a rare darkness extracted from the dimensional shadow. Since the essence is limited, contenders must fight for their share. The more darkness one obtains, the closer they get to becoming heir. If Loin wins, he will become the 6th prince, and if that happens, Chris's ambitions collapse. Hazar says he will appeal to the main house again and suggests they could involve Marion, but Chris stops him. He believes he can handle this alone. Hazar places a hand on his son's shoulder, acknowledging the boy's strength. It's a gesture Chris genuinely appreciates. Still, Chris being Chris, makes a sinister expression, reminding his father that he operates in his own twisted way. He asks if Count Tyreman's family is participating too. Hazar confirms that the 3rd son is indeed involved, and that he had also pushed against Chris's inclusion. Upon seeing his father's sudden frustration, Chris realizes his old man might care more than he lets on. Chris tells him to calm down. He plans to make everyone who doubted him eat their words. He brings up the Ebony Hunt, an event hosted by the Tyrements. Chris decides he'll join the hunt himself. A new path to prove his worth. The final scene transitions to Marion returning to her lord. She reports her mission's success and offers a surprising update. She praises Chris. This stuns the Elder Clan head, who only remembered the boy as a useless fool. But Marion insists that Chris has changed. The Patriarch asks if Chris has the qualities necessary to fulfill the wish. Marion reflects on that wish, the impossible dream of using forbidden magic to break fate and escape death itself. She's unsure, but she states one thing with confidence. Chris is their best chance. The clan head takes comfort in that, even though the family has rejected Chris's participation in the ritual, he says he won't challenge the decision. Instead, he wants to see how the boy overcomes this trial alone. Marion argues on Chris's behalf, but the old man silences her with a cold look. In that moment, she remembers. This is exactly the kind of man he's always been. The elder patriarch was a man of towering expectations and unwavering discipline, and so it surprised him deeply when Marion spoke so highly of Chris. Her praise wasn't empty. It carried the weight of her authority and observation. Hearing this, the old man gave a sharp command and summoned Simon, the clan's head steward. Simon, having overheard every word of the exchange, was now entrusted with a new responsibility: to monitor Chris closely from now until the Holy Dark ceremony. Simon accepted the task eagerly but couldn't help wanting to add his own flavor to it, maybe a little prank to keep things interesting. The patriarch shot him a cold, warning glance that froze the air. He reminded the steward not to get too comfortable. There was danger in that boy, danger that should not be underestimated. Simon, nicknamed Bloodsucker by some, still grinned, but the warning landed. Meanwhile, Marion could only hope the child would rise to the occasion. Beneath her composed exterior, she was concerned for what lay ahead. Back with Chris, he was immersed in his own analysis. He had recently reached 2-star level, but the leap to 3 stars felt daunting. It was clear he needed something more, something powerful. That something was Ebony, the mysterious dark energy that could rapidly enhance a mage's power. Fortunately for him, the Tiruman family was hosting the Ebony Hunt event, giving him the perfect opportunity to get his hands on it. The problem? Even defeating the event's beast, Karazo, didn't guarantee success. A hidden condition needed to be met in order to truly claim Ebony. That was the real challenge. Chris stepped out of the carriage, meeting an old merchant who looked empty-handed. Without hesitation, Chris tossed a hefty bag filled with coins at his feet. It was meant to be a gesture, but the young master wasn't here for small talk or gratitude. He pointed out, with a sly grin, that he was fully aware of the man's backdoor dealings, especially the tax evasion schemes the merchant thought were hidden. The merchant turned pale under Chris's sharp accusations, but the boy offered a way out. clean up the mess, and he would look the other way. There was, of course, one more request. Chris wanted the gray pill, an incredibly rare and wildly expensive item, sold only on the black market. The price didn't faze him. He told Marie to use her methods, and she wasted no time revealing her arsenal of torture tools. The poor merchant caved instantly, which only made Chris chuckle. He wasn't done. He also demanded a decent dagger and a solid set of armor. With that, he reboarded the carriage while the merchant silently cursed every god he knew. Marie, amused, noted that they had one more stop to make before heading home. Chris signaled the coachman to halt and stepped out near a shady vendor's stall, staring at a bottle of aphrodisiac with suspicion. Marie narrowed her eyes and asked if he was engaging in questionable behavior lately. Chris denied it, though her intense stare, animated like a JoJo character, made it clear she wasn't buying it. He claimed the potion was for his aging father, and told the server to keep this entire conversation a secret, even past death. Soon after, Chris returned home to meet his father and brother. Without missing a beat, he started teasing Thurn, forcing him to recite his obnoxiously long title. Thurn, ever patient, advised his brother not to get injured during the ebony hunt. Chris mocked him for sounding concerned, but the moment passed when Count Hazar commanded Chris to make sure he crushed every Tiruman contestant. The boy simply nodded, promising that he would bring home good news. Hazar, still hung up on Thurn's long-winded title, couldn't resist mocking him too. The scene shifted to the gates of the Tiruman estate. Chris arrived, only to be blocked by an orange goblin butler who informed him that young Lord Alois had issued a strict order. Chris was forbidden from entering. When pressed, the goblin hesitated but ultimately admitted that Chris would need to stay somewhere else in the capital. Chris's entourage was ready to step in, but he signaled them to hold back. Calmly, he asked who was expected to cover the hotel bill. The goblin replied that he could simply charge it to the Tiruman family. Chris's eyes lit up. Without hesitation, he booked the most luxurious estate possible, racking up 100,000 rupee tab. He had no problem burning someone else's money. As they discussed their next move, the trunk of the carriage popped open. To his horror, Marie sprang out like a cursed jack in the box. She had stowed away in his luggage, claiming her spot as his most loyal maid. Chris was baffled and annoyed, asking what the hell was wrong with her. The moment didn't last. Alois, the third prince and star of the ebony hunt, stormed up to Chris, furious over the outrageous hotel bill. Chris, completely unbothered, treated him like a background character. After all, Alois was the one who ordered him to stay elsewhere. Chris figured he was just following instructions, with style. Alois, livid, summoned a beast to settle the matter with violence. This wasn't an ordinary creature. It was a Tiruman-style beast, trained through dark magic. Unlike standard taming, this method manipulated emotions and invoked fear to control the beast's mind. It was a brutal technique, refined over years of practice. But Chris didn't flinch. With a smirk, he turned to Marie and casually told her to summon their own response to the feral creature standing before them. Chris, not one to back down from a challenge, calmly summoned a staff into his hands, practically daring Alois to make a move. The third prince, seething with rage, released his fearsome beast in response. The creature lunged at Chris with feral intensity, and though Chris managed to block the attack, it was no small feat. It took real nerve to hold his ground against something that wild. The impact threw Chris off balance and sent him skidding back, but instead of backing down, he smirked and taunted Alois for ganging up on him with a beast like a coward. Then he laid out a condition. If he won this skirmish, he'd enter the ebony hunt as a bodyguard, not some low-ranking driveman. Alois, too blinded by anger to think clearly, mounted the beast and tried to finish Chris off in one brutal blow. The creature slammed into the ground, cracking the earth beneath it. But Chris had already vanished from the spot. In a blink, he appeared behind Alois and delivered a punishing strike with his staff, knocking the prince around like a rag doll. Each hit fueled Alois's rage further, but something strange happened when the beast tried to lunge at Chris again. It stopped. Instead of charging, the creature froze in its tracks, eyes wide with primal terror. It whimpered, suddenly gripped by the fear of death. Alois stood stunned, not understanding the shift in behavior. The secret? Chris had conjured an illusion spell. Simple, but devastatingly effective on a creature ruled by instinct. Fear-based illusions worked wonders on beings like this, and Chris had no problem exploiting that. Not willing to admit defeat, Alois summoned a second beast, this one taking the form of a large, battle-hardened horse. Chris, unshaken, took the time to lecture the prince on the predictable nature of weaklings who rely on theatrics. Then, without hesitation, he dashed forward and struck Alois clean in the face, dropping him to the ground in a single, precise blow. As he delivered the final word of his taunt, Chris made it clear he wasn't going to waste an entire chapter waiting for an opponent to charge up their ultimate move. This wasn't some drawn-out anime fight. This was real, and he wasn't interested in giving his enemies time to pose. Later, Chris decided to reward himself with a little downtime. He strolled into an extravagant gambling hall, indulging in an expensive break from the day's chaos. This was his version of rest, costly, flashy, and unapologetically loud. Marie, predictably, allowed it, as long as alcohol stayed off the menu. Chris, unfortunately, had to sip on ginger ale, which he found far more punishing than anything he'd faced in combat. The Tiruman family's servants kept a close eye on him, having been ordered to do so by Alois himself. Chris noticed their presence and casually invited them to join his game. After all, he had just humiliated their master, who was probably still unconscious. The offer was tempting, but they respectfully declined, loyal to their duty. Chris didn't seem to mind. Instead, he played hard, drank his sad non-alcoholic beverage, and eventually let himself get knocked out from overindulgence. The servants, fooled by the act, reported that he was completely out cold. In truth, this was all part of his plan. Once they dropped their guard, Chris quietly packed his things and slipped away. He told Marie to stay behind, which, knowing her obsessive loyalty, was a painful order for her to obey. She still believed the aphrodisiac he'd bought earlier was for his own personal use and assumed he was sneaking out to meet women. Chris was exasperated by her wild assumptions and lack of nuance. Her mind, he noted, worked in one direction only. The scene shifted to the shadowed Kython mountain range, an infamous and dangerous terrain crawling with demonic beasts. This was the secret hunting ground of the Tiruman family, and Chris had no problem locating it. Security, as far as he could tell, was a joke, just 2 guards watching over the perimeter. Using an invisibility spell he begrudgingly learned from Marie, he passed through the defenses without a trace. He made his way to a dark altar. This was the heart of the darkness, the place where corrupted magic peaked. The altar radiated the energy he was after. But taking it wouldn't be so simple. He remembered a bizarre conversation he'd had with a talking beast. A damn furry, as he thought of it, who explained that the key to claiming ebony lay in manipulating the target creature, Karazo, into choosing death. The process required inducing both fear and twisted joy, leading the creature into such emotional chaos that it would prefer to die. At that precise moment, when fear peaked and euphoria cracked through, light would transform into pure darkness. That was when the energy could be harvested. This, Chris realized, was the very method the Tiruman family used in their beast control rituals. His goal now was to steal that secret technique, and use the aphrodisiac to drive Karazo into an uncontrollable frenzy. That would be the perfect storm. But time was short. He didn't have the hours, or days, it would take to master the ritual fully. He would have to improvise. Suddenly, he felt a chilling presence. His body tensed. Something powerful had just entered the area. He looked around, expecting someone to emerge from the shadows, but there was no one. The presence drew him instead toward an isolated cave. Inside, he was hit with an overwhelming wave of malice. The air thickened, his vision blurred, and his skin crawled under the pressure of raw magic. The entire cave was wrapped in a high-level dark barrier, practically humming with danger. Then he saw it. What stood before him wasn't just an anomaly. It was the rift of Gehenna. Gehenna. The demonic realm. A place of pure nightmares. It served as the nexus between the demon world and the human realm. A forbidden space that only the bold or the damned would approach. And now Chris, the reckless genius, had found it, and he was already thinking how to use it. Chris had it all mapped out. With the aphrodisiac in hand, the perfect bait was ready to lure Karazo directly to the rift. He believed this method would guarantee the hunt's success. Confidence high, he turned to leave, only to be met by a familiar and unsettling presence. Simon, the clan's grand steward, known infamously as the Bloodsucker, stepped from the shadows with a smirk. He had been following the boy's progress, intrigued by his takedown of Alois and manipulation of the prince's own servants. Now, witnessing Chris orchestrate such an elaborate trap was enough to awaken the old monster's curiosity. The Grand Steward wanted in on the game. With a glimmer in his eye, Simon reached for the rift of Gehenna itself. As his fingers brushed its edge, a streak of blood spilled from the dark void. Then a voice, unnatural and ancient, echoed from the rift, calling Simon by a name long buried. The betrayer. The rift recognized him. Something dark had been set in motion. The day of the ebony hunt finally arrived. Alois, proud and puffed up, stood under his family's banner, playing the role of noble prince. Chris, never one to let arrogance slide, mocked him to his face, bringing up their recent fight and questioning how someone who got knocked around so easily could act like royalty. Alois retorted by insulting the holy sword Chris carried, claiming it was a useless prop. Chris simply smirked and said he'd gladly test its uselessness by using it to beat the pompous prince into the dirt. With the tension bubbling, Alois turned to his men and gave the order to begin the ritual. The plan was simple. Lure Karazo to the altar and perform the control ceremony. The guards and mages scattered into formation, following his command. Chris, meanwhile, kept his eyes on a suspicious bat lurking above, a secret scout, no doubt. He feigned obedience and agreed to guard the flag, the easiest job on paper. When the mage supervising him snapped at his attitude, Chris gladly walked off to relax, irritating him further. Arlos, trying to maintain control, instructed his mages to focus and ignore the boy. Chris, of course, wasn't just lounging. Everything was falling into place. He had already received the dagger and orb from Grandel as planned. Watching Arlos and his mage circle around, Chris sensed it. Karazo was near. The beast, with its large round eyes and deceptively innocent appearance, made its entrance. Most would mistake it for a cute forest dweller. They'd be wrong. Arlos wasted no time initiating the ritual to bind it, but things quickly went south. Instead of falling under their control, Karazo snapped. It let out a furious shriek and knocked Arlos aside with a brutal swipe. The prince hit the ground hard. The lead mage rushed to his aid, only to discover that Arlos had been poisoned by the beast's touch. Panic spread as mages erected defensive barriers around their leader. Chris, watching the chaos unfold, barely contained his amusement. He had already slipped the aphrodisiac into play earlier, pushing the beast into a frenzy. This was all going exactly how he wanted. Though Arlos had an antidote and managed to stabilize, the battle was far from over. The guards charged, trying to push Karazo back, but the creature barreled through them like leaves in a storm. Its massive wings created shockwaves with every flap, and its screeches shattered the focus of even the bravest fighters. Karazo reared back to finish Arlos off, but Chris intervened. With a smirk and effortless movement, he blocked the strike. Then he looked down on the prince and called him pathetic, stating that he'd only offer help under one condition. Arlos would have to call him brother. Arlos, pride wounded but fear mounting, refused at first. That is, until Chris stepped aside and entertained the idea of letting the beast run wild again. With the protective spells breaking and no one else left to stand, Arlos caved, muttering the words Chris wanted to hear. Satisfied, Chris swung his weapon and blasted Karazo away, momentarily stunning the beast. He followed up with a binding spell that caught the mage's attention. It wasn't one they had taught him. Arlos looked on in disbelief. Chris had somehow mastered a spell of this level. But in reality, Chris had only used a lesser mimic, enough to fool them, not the beast. Even so, he held the binding perfectly, controlling Karazo with sharp precision. Arlos watched in horror as Chris led the beast, not to safety, but toward the rift of Gehenna. There, under the looming pressure of the dark gate, Karazo trembled. The aura of death rolled in heavy waves, consuming the creature in fear. That's what Chris had been waiting for. The moment terror overtook its instincts. In a flash, he plunged his blade deep into its core. By the time Arlos and his guards stumbled into the scene, it was already over. The beast lay still, and Chris stood victorious. Arlos, concerned for his team's safety, urged everyone to leave immediately, but Chris had other plans. With a sly grin, he presented the ashen orb he'd extracted. It wasn't what they expected. The mage exploded in anger, furious at Chris's interference. But to everyone's surprise, Arlos spoke up, thanking Chris. He acknowledged that, without him, their team likely wouldn't have made it out alive. For a moment, Chris felt a twinge of guilt. Only a moment. Because the orb Arlos was looking at wasn't the real one. It was a fake. Chris had already pocketed the real orb long before they'd arrived. Still, he kept up appearances and reminded Arlos of their deal. From now on, the prince would have to address him as senior brother. A ridiculous demand, especially from someone younger, but Chris reveled in the discomfort. Just as they began trading snark again, a wave of overwhelming pressure surged through the air around them, cold, ancient, and crushing. Both boys froze. Something else was now watching. Two glowing, merciless eyes emerged from the darkness, locking onto them with chilling intent. Chris immediately understood the weight of the situation. This wasn't just another enemy. What stood before them was a demon of Gehenna, a towering, grotesque monstrosity radiating bloodlust. Its twisted face sneered at them, exuding that familiar, suffocating pressure only something born of the void could deliver. Arlos, surprisingly unselfish for once, stepped forward to shield Chris, shouting that he needed to escape while he still could. It was the first time Chris had seen something admirable in the third prince. And just as things got dire, Chris noticed it, up above, a bat, eerily still, its eyes fixed on them. That wasn't just a bat. It was a surveillance tool, and Chris instantly realized who it belonged to. Without hesitation, he hurled his blade at the creature, piercing it clean. Somewhere far off, Simon staggered as the connection was severed. The Grand Steward couldn't believe it. The child had sensed his presence through the bat and taken action. With his link cut and bloodline arts rendered useless from afar, Simon panicked. If he didn't move fast, there would be no one left to save. Back at the cave, Chris voiced his disgust at being spied on. The demon only laughed, amused that a mere human dared to complain about surveillance in the face of death. It ridiculed him, claiming he must have a death wish. Chris didn't disagree, but he wasn't planning on dying without leaving scars. Recalling the battles he'd experienced in the Age of Ruin, Chris gauged the power level immediately. This one was easily 5-star territory. No way he could win in a straight fight, but he wasn't one to play fair. Arlos shouted at him for wasting his magic, particularly after the sleeping spell had failed. So Chris dropped the niceties and used the old school method, knocking the prince out with a clean punch to the jaw. The demon's grin widened. He entertained the idea that Chris was offering the unconscious prince as a sacrifice. In fact, he even offered to let Chris live in exchange. But Chris wasn't the type to bow out with grace. He spat at the demon. A silent, defiant rejection. No words needed. He then revealed the holy sword, Grenade, still in his possession. The demon was surprised, even impressed, but mocked him nonetheless. It pointed out that Chris had no control over such a weapon. It launched its first attack, a heavy wave of dark energy aimed straight at him. Chris braced himself, managing to block the hit, but the force sent him flying. Blood trickled from his mouth. The weight of the impact shook his bones. Still, he stood. The demon, condescending and amused, gave him another offer. Sacrifice the prince, save himself. Chris didn't speak. Instead, he let his actions scream louder than any refusal. Drawing upon the ebony he had acquired, he coated his blade in radiant golden light, a weapon of pure contradiction against the darkness. That light, so unfamiliar, so threatening, caused the demon of Gehenna to flinch. It didn't understand how a human could wield such energy. Chris, grinning through the pain, knew he had the upper hand, at least for a moment. The demon, furious, gathered a massive sphere of shadow to obliterate him. Chris responded with a full-powered swing, cutting through the darkness, cutting through the demon. The clash echoed with raw force, and the demon's body was severed. But Chris knew the cost. His body wasn't ready. The moment the adrenaline wore off, he collapsed. Before he blacked out, he remembered the technique. Dead Sea Flash, a move he'd carried over from a past life. A technique inspired by the lone ray of light resting above the Dead Sea, honed with purpose, fueled by sacrifice. In that memory, he saw his old comrade. The one who wasn't chosen, who believed in Chris as the one who would carry the light forward. That belief had carried him here, and maybe, just maybe, that friend was right. Far off, someone else was watching. Mufina, the first seed among the 7 circles of Gehenna, observed from the dark. A being above the battlefield, intrigued by the human boy who dared to challenge a demon with golden light. Chris awoke 2 days later, back at the estate, body aching but intact. He'd survived. The darkness he'd harvested was safe with him. He recalled a voice just before he passed out, Mufina's. She had taken interest, which could mean opportunity or ruin. In this world, demons with promise were often noticed by those above, nurtured by their twisted blessings. But Chris saw it differently. In his view, leaning on a demon's gift was just a crutch for those too weak to grow on their own. As for Mufina, if she was just a figure from the 7th circle, she couldn't be that special. He wasn't impressed yet. Soon after, Count Tyramon himself visited. Unlike his son, the Count had presence, refined and imposing, like a seasoned warrior who'd never lost his edge. Chris made an effort to rise, but Tyramon insisted he rest. The Count updated him. An investigative team had been dispatched after the incident. Their findings confirmed outside interference, tampering from a foreign mage. It wasn't just a random demonic awakening. Someone had stirred the darkness. Luckily, before it escalated further, the demon had been pulled back. They were lucky to walk away alive. That much was certain. Chris knew it better than anyone. What made it more interesting was the fact that no one had figured out he was the one who had taken the demon down. And honestly, he got it. If someone told him a teenage noble with a reputation for being a spoiled brat had soloed a Gehenna-class demon, he wouldn't believe it either. Lord Tyramon, however, surprised him. The man admitted that he'd misjudged Chris, having assumed he was nothing more than a scoundrel during their first encounter. Now, after everything, he said he owed the boy not just an apology, but a debt. He called him a benefactor to house Tyramon. Chris, ever the master of appearances, brushed it off with a humble smile. He claimed he'd only done what was right, acting in service of the greater good. He played the selfless card, even if he didn't believe half of it. Deep down, a tiny fragment of guilt sparked, but not enough to change the narrative. Tyramon was moved by his supposed nobility and promised to fulfill any request the boy might have. Chris didn't waste a second. He asked Lord Tyramon to reconcile with House Hazar. The request landed with weight. Tyramon paused, clearly stunned by the suggestion. Chris explained further. He wanted to create a rivalry with Arlos, but a healthy one. It was better for both houses to work together rather than remain divided. There was opportunity in unity. Tyramon took a moment to consider, but Chris pressed on. He pointed out that the conflict between their families had always been orchestrated by the main house. It was classic divide and control tactics. If the branch families ever united, they'd pose a threat to the very power that oppressed them. This feud was never theirs to begin with. Tyramon raised an eyebrow, wondering aloud if Chris was suggesting rebellion. Dangerous words, especially from a child. Chris denied it outright. He said it wasn't rebellion he was after, it was autonomy. They didn't need to be pawns. Not anymore. The Count respected the boy's insight. He liked how Chris thought, and after another beat, promised to reach out to Count Hazar. A reconciliation would begin. Just like that, Chris had pulled another thread into his web. One more ally gained. One step closer to building a power base strong enough to stand against whatever storm the Age of Ruin would bring. Tyramon, clearly pleased, turned to his son and scolded him for standing silently through such an important conversation. Arlos, in response, quietly stepped forward and offered Chris the ashen shard he'd safeguarded. He admitted that after regaining consciousness, he'd held onto it until he could return it properly. Chris teased him for being unexpectedly grateful, using the moment to chip away at the prince's inflated ego. The back and forth made Tyramon chuckle. In turn, he presented a gift of his own, an ultra-rare summoning stone, capable of calling a beast up to tier 4. Chris's eyes widened slightly, even he had to admit, that was a top-tier item. As a final gesture, Tyramon vowed to submit a formal report to the Dark Ceremony Council, personally vouching for Chris's inclusion. It was everything the boy had aimed for, all neatly falling into place. After exchanging a few final words, both father and son left the room, allowing him to rest. But Chris wasn't alone. He turned his attention to the unseen guest lurking in the shadows and casually invited him to come out. Simon, the bloodsucker, stepped forward, amused that Chris had noticed him even when someone as sharp as Lord Tyramon had not. The clan's chief steward introduced himself with a twisted grin. One of Lord Noga's most loyal men, he had been eager to meet the boy in person. Chris immediately recognized the name. Simon was the master of the Bloodshadow Corps, a nightmarish faction known for terrorism, assassinations, and indiscriminate slaughter. Empire, light faction. It didn't matter. They attacked without bias or mercy. Their leader, a demon who had reached 8-star level and later evolved into a 9-star during the Age of Ruin, eventually rose to become the 10th Demon King. And Simon? He was his legitimate blood son. Simon complimented the boy's cunning. He said he already knew about Chris wiping out the Gehenna demon. Despite the surveillance bat being destroyed, he still had intel. Chris tried to play dumb, but the steward didn't bite. He was too sharp for games. Simon said he'd visited the cave himself. There hadn't been a single trace of the demon left behind. That confirmed it. No reverse summoning had been used. Chris hadn't just fought the demon, he had annihilated it. What remained was the how. Simon pressed for answers. How had Chris managed to erase the demon so completely? He added that this conversation would be reported directly to Lord Noga. Chris, unfazed, said he had no intention of revealing his trump card. Not for the elder clan head, not for anyone. Simon, intrigued, remarked that Chris was like a wild beast hiding its claws until the very last second. Dangerous, unpredictable, and intelligent. That made him even more interesting. Chris didn't stop there. He flipped the table, questioning why Simon was so certain the demon had been erased rather than summoned back. There was no clear evidence to prove one over the other. So why was Simon so convinced? Then came the trap. Chris laid it out cold. He knew Simon had been the one who summoned the demon to begin with. And if he wanted to, he could expose the truth to Lord Noga. After all, Simon's recklessness had endangered multiple noble houses. That wasn't something that could be brushed aside. Cornered, Simon admitted it. He took full responsibility. But Chris, with that sly smile, said he wouldn't report it. Not now. He preferred keeping Simon in debt. Power didn't always come from force. It came from leverage. And now, he had it. Simon, lips curling, acknowledged the move. He called it mercy. He liked the game Chris was playing. With a final grin, he faded into the shadows, promising they would meet again. Even after Simon vanished, Chris remained still for a moment, processing the interaction. He knew full well that the bloodsucker wasn't just another creepy old man lurking in shadows. Simon was one of the core variables tied to the Age of Ruin. Someone that dangerous, that close to power, couldn't be ignored. Chris would need him. Maybe not as a friend, but definitely not as an enemy. If he could win influence over Simon, maybe, just maybe, he could bend the grim future a little more in his favor. Every move had a purpose. When Marie informed him that the preparations to return to the main estate were complete, Chris was ready to leave, until Alois showed up. The prince seemed uncharacteristically calm, and Chris was surprised by the interruption. Alois greeted them politely, then asked if they were heading out. Chris, without missing a beat, reminded him to use the correct title. The one Alois had promised to call him by, despite being younger than the prince by 2 years. But Alois wasn't here to bicker, he came with a warning. Since Chris had called them family during the hunt, he believed it was his duty to share the truth. He warned Chris to keep his guard up against Loin de Baron, the main force pushing against his entry into the Dark Rite. Loin wasn't just a rival, he was backed by the main family, equipped with top-tier elixirs, high-grade techniques, and demonic blessings. In short, Chris was entering a battlefield where the odds were deliberately stacked against him. Chris didn't seem fazed. Instead, he offered a warning of his own. He advised Alois not to participate in the ceremony. Not for political reasons, but for survival. That suggestion infuriated the prince, who saw it as a selfish move to monopolize the dark energy for himself. But Chris didn't care. He boldly declared that it didn't matter who stood in his way, he was going to crush them in the ceremony. That was the end of the discussion. He gave Marie the signal to move and repeated his warning as they departed. Back at House Hazar, Thurn was stunned to find out his brother had already locked himself into solo training upon arrival. Chris had isolated himself, stating clearly that no one should disturb him until the rite began. But Thurn wasn't letting this go. He stormed off to find Chris, still insisting on calling him by that ridiculous full title. He wanted to uphold their promise to duel. Chris, though impressed by Thurn's growth, having reached mid-2-star rank, wasn't eager to fight. His training was priority. Still, he remembered Thurn was also participating in the rite. Instead of refusing outright, Chris told his brother they'd postpone the duel until after his training session. He assured him he wouldn't delay it again. Thurn, showing that same determined fire, agreed. That stubborn energy reminded Chris of someone from his past life. Someone who had refused to back down, no matter the odds. Later that evening, Chris sat alone in his room. He had exactly 1 month left until the dark rite. With that in mind, he bit down on the ebony orb he'd harvested from Karazo. The bitter taste was awful, but it was the price of progress. As he lay back, he felt the chaotic surge of dark energy rush through him. What surprised him wasn't the darkness. It was the glimmer of light hidden inside. The energy from the beast wasn't pure. It carried the remnants of emotion, maybe even regret. Chris wondered if Karazo's pain had left an imprint, and realized why demons had trouble absorbing ebony orbs. They rejected the light. But Chris didn't. He welcomed it. He planned to fuse the energies together and forge something entirely new. While demons wasted the light, he would turn it into strength. His core absorbed the entirety of the orb's energy, changing his very senses. Eyes closed, breath steady, the transformation was complete. Far from there, Lady Idolane reviewed a report from her servant. It detailed Chris's actions during the hunt, including rumors of a demon encounter, one he had survived. She'd been keeping a close eye on him for some time. Now her curiosity had turned into something else. Suspicion. Half a month passed, and Chris had stayed locked in training. But on the promised day, Thurn didn't hesitate. He burst into his brother's room, determined to make good on their duel. The moment he stepped in, he felt it. Chris's aura had changed completely. His presence was overwhelming, commanding, like standing before a storm. Chris grinned at Thurn's surprise. He said if Thurn wanted a beating so badly, who was he to deny it? But there was a catch. They would duel, but if Thurn lost, he had to give up his slot in the sacred dark rite. Chris said weaklings had no place in a battlefield like that. And right now, Thurn was still too soft. Angered, Thurn drew his blade. Chris sighed. Since his brother refused to see reason, he'd just have to beat it into him. The duel was over fast. Thurn gave it everything he had, but it wasn't close. Chris dominated the fight and left his brother bedridden. The healers said he'd need at least 2 weeks to recover, effectively removing him from this year's rite. Chris later asked their father for some private time with Thurn. Count Hazar, curious but trusting, allowed it. Whatever Chris had to say next, it wasn't going to be a lecture. It was going to be something deeper, something only a brother could say after a lesson like that. Right now, Thurn sat sulking like a child denied a toy, clearly wounded, not just physically, but emotionally. He asked why his own older brother seemed to hate watching him grow. From where he stood, Christian mocked every achievement, never missing a chance to undermine him. And now, he believed Christian had crossed a line, intentionally injuring him enough to knock him out of the sacred dark rite. Christian could see it in his brother's eyes, that building pressure of frustration and heartbreak, but they weren't seeing the same picture. He explained that this wasn't about belittling him. This was about pushing him forward. Thurn wasn't ready for what was coming. Entering the rite now would be a foolish move, and Christian couldn't allow his brother to waste his one chance at gaining dark energy by making a premature leap. He said the harshness wasn't cruelty, it was urgency. Thurn was stubborn, and Christian had to act decisively to snap him out of it. But more importantly, he explained, pure dark energy wasn't even suited for Thurn. What fit him better, what would unlock his real potential, was gray dark energy. Just as light splintered into categories like holy, radiant, and spectral, darkness had its own complex spectrum. Pure dark energy was regarded as the apex form, sure, but gray dark energy wasn't far beneath. It specialized in curse magic, something Thurn had already shown a natural inclination for, even if he hadn't realized it yet. Christian couldn't exactly tell him that he'd seen his future, one where he became a master of cursecraft, so he came up with a believable excuse. He claimed he had picked up on Thurn's affinity through their sparring sessions, stating that he, too, had gone all out and recognized the way Thurn's energy responded to the fight. If Thurn were to force himself to absorb pure dark energy without mastering gray first, it would only work against him. Sure, absorbing a superior element came with benefits, but not if it clashed with your nature. In Thurn's case, it would slow his progress, maybe even break his path altogether. This, Christian insisted, was genuine advice. Not from a rival. Not from a superior. From a brother who wanted to see Thorn succeed. He reached into his pocket and handed over a rare ash pill. A gift. Its value was immense, though Christian had recently been conned out of it. He didn't mind. He had already consumed something far greater. The pill was better off in his brother's hands. Thorn felt it. The sincerity. The trust. Maybe he'd been wrong to think Christian was just a heartless bastard. But a question still burned inside him. If Christian was capable of showing this much compassion, then why had he acted like such a disgrace when their mother was dying? Why had he let her suffer through so much without offering even a shred of comfort? Christian didn't answer. He couldn't. He hadn't been this version of himself back then. Still, guilt clung to him like a scar. He had inherited this body, but the pain in the memories was his now, and there was no erasing that. Days passed, and the cathedral of the De Baron family echoed with the noise of arriving carriages, each more extravagant than the last. Among the candidates stepping out in polished attire and heavy titles came one name that stopped conversation altogether: Christian van Baron Hazar. He emerged from his carriage after the long, exhausting trip, stretching slightly. No teleportation portal had been arranged for him. Typical. The main house was being petty again. That was fine. When he became clan head, they would regret every slight. Marie, bound to him through their pact, was finally allowed to step out too. Only one companion was permitted for each candidate, and she was his by both magic and loyalty. The thought of being alone with him at such a prestigious event had her giddy, even though technically banshees didn't have hearts to flutter. As soon as Christian appeared, whispers surged through the crowd. A storm of silent judgment swept through the ceremony grounds. Candidates from noble families exchanged glances, wondering why the notorious failure of House Hazar was getting attention from the highest echelon. That attention came in the form of Simon, the vampiric steward, who personally welcomed Christian, announcing his arrival under the orders of the elder clan head himself. Simon scanned him from top to bottom, visibly impressed by how far he had come in such a short span. The boy looked less like a problem child now and more like a contender. He informed everyone present that the elder had summoned Christian to meet him directly. The clan head wanted to see, with his own eyes, the one everyone had been whispering about lately. Simon could tell from Christian's expression. He wasn't surprised by this call. If anything, he had been expecting it. So the first stop was clear: the private study of the elder clan head. Inside that sanctum of power, Christian found two figures waiting for him. One, the old man who ruled over their bloodline. The other, his aunt, Marion, commander of the Black Shadow Knights. The combined presence of the two was enough to paralyze most candidates on the spot. The moment the elder clan head's gaze locked onto him, Christian felt a suffocating wave of pressure crush down on his body. It wasn't the type of discomfort you could shake off. It was a cold, smothering force that made it hard to breathe, let alone move. He felt like an insect pinned beneath a god's fingertip. The old man was doing it deliberately, pouring out his dark energy like a tide to test him. For a beginner, it would have been overwhelming. But Christian wasn't a beginner. Not anymore. Though his knees trembled and his breath caught in his throat, he stood tall. Grinding his teeth, he greeted the elder with a deep bow, formally addressing him as Duke Baron, sovereign ruler of the Dark Magic clan. When asked if the sudden audience caught him by surprise, Christian responded with honesty. He wasn't surprised. He knew a rising power like his couldn't be ignored for long. The answer pleased the Duke. Marion and Simon both added their praise, acknowledging the boy's rapid evolution, but the old man wasn't ready to jump on the bandwagon just yet. He explained, in that weathered voice of his, that time was the only true judge of greatness. Plenty of prodigies bloomed early only to wither just as fast. Maybe Christian was just another shoot that would break as soon as it tasted sunlight. Christian didn't argue. Instead, he added to it. He said that perhaps he was the kind of sapling that not only grew, but grew past every tree that came before it. Maybe, just maybe, he was something unprecedented. At the very least, he promised that the Duke wouldn't be disappointed. There was a pause. Then, for the first time, the elder clan head smiled. He didn't fully commit, but he admitted he would place his hopes on the boy and see what came of it. Upon dismissal, Christian bowed again and left the room with quiet dignity. As the door closed behind him, Marion turned to the Duke and asked for his thoughts. The old man said that the boy had exceeded his expectations, but that was precisely why he worried. True talent often invited turbulence. And with the winds of blood gathering across the magic empire, the future was anything but calm. Still, he admitted that today, for the first time in a long while, a small spark of hope had entered the room. That Hazar child just might be the one to realize the wish he had long buried. Night descended on the De Baron estate, and with it came the banquet on the eve of the sacred dark rite. The grand hall buzzed with nobility and cold ambition. Then the servants raised their voices, announcing the arrival of Count Hazar's eldest son. Christian van Baron Hazar entered the hall with a presence that turned heads. Dressed to the nines and radiating arrogance, he walked like a man who belonged there. The room buzzed with whispers. Not about his lineage, but about his earlier visit to the elder clan head. Some dismissed him as a joke, others whispered crude rumors, suggesting he had been summoned as nothing more than a pretty face for the old man's entertainment. Christian didn't mind. In fact, he welcomed the slander. If anything, it proved he looked good enough to warrant the gossip. Marie, ever loyal, only encouraged his delusions, as always. The first thing Christian zeroed in on was the drinks table. Finally, real alcohol. Not the ginger ale he'd been stuck with back home. But before he could savor the moment, a server stopped him, reminding him that underage drinking wasn't allowed. The irony wasn't lost on him. Most of these kids had likely killed someone by now, but heaven forbid they drink a little wine. So it was back to ginger ale. Again, he sipped it like poison. Then the hall shifted. Every conversation fell to a hush. The main family's heirs had arrived. The doors opened to reveal 4 imposing figures wrapped in layers of fine silk and embedded authority. They didn't need to announce themselves. Their aura did the talking. First came Eshid de Baron, the second young lord. Then Julienne de Baron, the first young lady. She moved with grace, eyes calm and unreadable. Following her was Jupian, the second young lady, radiant and sharp. Last was Mysik de Baron, the third young lord, reserved and eerie. Some attendees were disappointed that the first young lord, the unhinged one, hadn't made an appearance. But Christian's eyes stayed on Eshid, the man who had twisted the court's perception of him. The one responsible for staining his name in the eyes of the clan. Christian waited for a remark, an insult, even a glance. But Eshid walked by without so much as breathing in his direction. He treated Christian like empty space. Not even worth contempt. That, Christian thought, was worse than hatred. It confirmed that Eshid didn't see him as competition. Just a bug. Then Julienne passed. Christian's gaze lingered longer than he meant it to. There was something strange about her, though nothing overt. Marion had warned him before, told him to be wary of her, but he couldn't see the threat. At least, not yet. He decided to figure her out later. Tonight, he had done enough recon. As he turned to leave and prepare for the trials ahead, a butler intercepted him. The man introduced himself as For, a summoner employed by young Master Loin. The name alone made Christian's jaw tighten. For politely implied that someone unqualified had slipped into the list of candidates. Someone with little merit, who could become a liability. Someone whose presence could tarnish the name of the Great Dark Clan. Christian didn't need a translator. The butler was talking about him. He asked directly, and For didn't even bother to deny it. Standing behind him on the balcony was his young master, curly-headed, smug, and clearly trying to provoke a reaction. Christian found this tactic pathetic. He believed that if someone had a problem, they should come deal with it themselves, not send someone else to poke the bear. Still, he figured he'd give the brat a talk tomorrow during the rite. Tonight, he decided to entertain himself with the bold summoner in front of him. Without bothering to draw his weapon, he told For to go ahead and show off those so-called summoning tricks. Christian figured he didn't even need to lift a stick to deal with a clown like this. As the tension thickened, people in the banquet hall began to watch. Even the first young lady cracked a strange smile. Seconds later, gasps echoed through the room. For was on his knees, shielding himself from the very spirits he had summoned. Christian sat leisurely on one of the spirits like it was a throne. 2 others served him obediently. The guests were stunned. No one had seen anything like it. For had made the first move, calling forth evil spirits without warning. But instead of attacking Christian, the spirits turned on their summoner the moment Christian made a simple gesture. He took control so fast it looked like he was cheating. Christian even sensed Loin's pathetic attempt to intervene, but it was barely worth his attention. The curly-headed brat was fuming with embarrassment. It was a disgrace for a direct heir. He should have just challenged Christian himself instead of sending a pawn. As shameless as ever, Loin insisted he had nothing to do with the attack. It was a ridiculous lie. No one with eyes could believe that, not when his servant lay bruised on the floor, silently begging for help. Tired of the farce, Christian called it a night and walked off. He'd see them again at the sacred dark rite. That brat needed a lesson in how to carry himself. And now, the day had come. The candidates had assembled, tension in the air. All except Christian seemed anxious. He looked like someone dragged him out of bed and ruined his morning. Among the group was Alois Tiraman. Christian had already warned the guy not to show up, but Alois was stubborn. You couldn't really blame him, though. Attending the sacred dark rite was a rare honor. Then, the last candidate made his entrance. Loin, curly-haired and clueless, walked in with fake bravado. Christian was already itching to put the kid in his place. With everyone gathered, Sebastian, the small and stiff vice butler of the main house, stepped forward to welcome them. He announced that he'd be guiding them to the sacred ground. With a firm tap of his staff on the floor, space shattered, revealing a staircase spiraling down into darkness. No one had expected the rite to take place underground. In truth, it was a high-level illusion, an imaginary space brought to life. Christian was the only one who realized it. Without saying a word, Sebastian started his descent like it was a stroll in the park. The candidates followed quickly, not wanting to be left behind. The staircase dragged them down endlessly until they arrived in a hall filled with mirrored illusions. Sebastian walked ahead at a brisk pace. The others tried to keep up, already sweating and struggling. The terrain twisted beneath their feet, steep slopes, narrow bends, winding paths. Even Loin, thought to be a favorite, was panting and faltering. Sebastian, an ex-hunter, didn't slow down. Instead, he warned them that the ground would vanish for those who lagged behind. Right on cue, 2 participants fell into the void as the floor gave out beneath them. Panic set in, but there was no time to dwell on it. Sebastian suddenly broke into a full sprint with his stubby legs. Candidates dropped like flies. Loin took a moment to sneer at the ones falling behind, but the smugness vanished when he saw Christian keeping pace effortlessly. Christian looked like he was out for a walk, no sweat, no heavy breathing, just calm, focused ease. He decided to mess with Loin, mocking his performance and calling him a pampered mutt who was all bark. Considering how many resources had been poured into Loin's upbringing, his effort was embarrassing. Christian thought every single one of these so-called elites was dumb. Pushing themselves in an illusion was laughable. While the rest were burning out, he hadn't used a single drop of energy. One spell twist, and he was practically immune to the illusion's effects. Sebastian noticed. Clearly, someone upstairs had tipped him off about the Khazar air. At last, the 4 survivors reached the end of the track. 3 collapsed in exhaustion. Christian stood tall, unfazed. Alois looked at him in disbelief. Christian told him to train harder, just to mess with him. Suddenly, a strange light danced before them, and an eerie voice cut through the silence. The voice explained that this place housed the purest dark energy, fittingly named the Sacred Darkness. The light shaped itself into a disturbing yet captivating woman. Ryu, the overseer of the sacred ground. She declared that the heirs would now attempt to obtain the Great Pure Darkness, just as the 3rd-ranked Demon King, the Dark Destroyer, once had. She raised her hand, etching glowing lines into the floor. There wasn't enough darkness to go around, she explained. Each candidate would take a different path, each path guarded by demon beasts. The first to reach the end would claim the prize. She warned that accidents could happen, and if a fight broke out, that wasn't grounds for disqualification. Everyone had their own path, so clashes were unlikely. But if they did happen, wasting time would only give the others an advantage. Ryu's final words of advice were sharp and simple. She said that focusing on one's own survival was the only true path to success. Then, after a casual 5 count, she wished them all good fortune and signaled the start of the trial. Sebastian, apparently unbothered by the gravity of what was about to unfold, turned to his coworker and tried to place a bet, blood juice on the line, on who would come out on top. But Ryu had already vanished, leaving the usually composed vice butler irritated and talking to himself. Elsewhere, deep within one of the many branching paths, Lone Van Baron finally met his first real obstacle. A pack of demon beasts stood in his way, flame-spewing, 4-eyed wolves, snarling and snapping with murderous intent. They launched at him, but he didn't flinch. He coated his hand in thick dark energy and charged in. In a matter of seconds, he struck down every single wolf. Each move was targeted, fast, and lethal, hitting vital points with practiced precision. He assessed the situation mid-fight, concluding that these beasts were no better than low-tier 2-star creatures. Against someone like him, an upper 2-star fiend, they were just warm-up targets. But Lone wasn't focused on the fight. He was imagining Christian struggling, cursing, maybe even bleeding, somewhere deeper in the trial. According to the rules, each route was supposed to be equal in difficulty, the same length, the same trials. But Lone had bribed a mage. He had paid to have Christian's path filled with stronger, more violent demon beasts. He figured the bastard of Khazar wouldn't make it out alive, and when he didn't, it would all look like a tragic accident, no questions asked. Deaths in the Sacred Dark Rite were considered unfortunate casualties, not crimes. The plan, as far as Lone was concerned, was foolproof. A short while later, Lone reached the exit, an ancient door leading to the heart of the sacred ground. He looked around and, seeing no one, celebrated to himself. He believed he'd won, but then he saw him. Christian was already there, standing off to the side, relaxed and watching the fool with calm eyes. In fact, he had been there for some time, waiting. Lone froze. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. His plan should have worked. He muttered without thinking that Christian's path had been loaded with stronger monsters. The words slipped out before he could stop them. He realized too late he had just confessed. Christian, who had already suspected some tampering, now had solid confirmation. Lone tried to recover his composure, puffing himself up like he always did when hiding behind the authority of his bloodline. He loudly claimed that combat between participants was forbidden. At the same time, he began charging his fists with dark energy, the hypocrisy thick in the air. He lunged. A haymaker, aimed squarely at Christian's head. but Christian merely leaned back, letting the punch fly past. His eyes stayed locked on Lone, reading his every move. He observed the technique, a close-range combat art that detonated energy on impact, capable of snapping bones clean through. Lone continued his assault, throwing wild punches at a pace that bordered on reckless desperation. But Christian moved like smoke, slipping between the strikes. Then, he feigned an opening. Lone took the bait. Christian goaded him with a few well-timed insults. Predictably, the arrogant air lunge, thinking he had finally caught him. Christian caught the incoming arm and redirected the momentum. It was fast, fluid, and brutal. He locked Lone's arm and started applying pressure, slowly and methodically. Christian grinned and told him to keep quiet, to try and muffle the screams. The next few minutes were going to be hell. The pressure built, the hold tightened, and then came the unmistakable, sickening snap of joints being destroyed. In front of the dark sacred ground, a scream tore through the silence, a deep, guttural cry of agony that echoed into the void. Hours passed before the last of the final four finally arrived, panting and drenched in sweat. It was Alois, barely standing after hacking his way through an endless horde of monsters. He didn't expect to find Christian already there, lounging near the finish line and casually waving at him like this was some backyard game. At Christian's feet lay the other two participants, unconscious and motionless. Christian appeared more irritated than amused. He had waited far too long, and Alois's lateness was grating on his nerves. Since they were at least somewhat familiar with each other, Christian offered the newcomer a choice: collapse on his own or be helped into unconsciousness. Alois immediately understood what was about to happen. He gathered dark energy in his palms, making it clear he wasn't just going to bow out. He wanted to prove something. Since their last encounter, he hadn't been idle. He had trained, improved, grown stronger. But unfortunately for him, effort had limits. No amount of progress could close the distance between an ant and a god. Christian figured leaving the bodies behind for the elders to find was fine. They'd understand. In about 5 years, he predicted, the first great war against the Alliance would erupt. By then, he needed to have the Dark Magic clan in his pocket. That meant there was no room for sharing. Not an ounce of sacred darkness could be spared. With the competition handled, it was finally time. Time to step forward and claim the prize. The sacred darkness stood just behind the final door, raw, potent, and legendary. This power was said to be capable of lifting a fiend to transcendent status. Back in his prime, the Elder Clan head had absorbed 80% of the sacred darkness and rose to prominence, becoming one of the most powerful beings of his era, even among the demon monarchs. The progenitor of the clan, the infamous Dark Destroyer, had absorbed over 90%, ascending to the level of Demon King. Christian wasn't aiming to match them. He aimed to eclipse them. Logic followed that if one could absorb 100% of the sacred darkness, they could rise above even the Demon Emperor. As his palm connected with the dark globe, an overwhelming surge exploded through his body. Darkness pulsed through his veins and arteries, reshaping everything inside him. Meanwhile, outside the sacred ground, chaos was erupting among the clan's higher-ups. Word had just arrived. Every single prospective heir had been eliminated, except for the bastard of Khazar. Even young Master Loin was found battered and broken, barely clinging to life. The elders lost their composure. Accusations flew immediately, claims that Christian must have used illegal magic or forbidden tools. They demanded an investigation. Before the chaos spiraled further, the second young lady, Jupian Deberan, spoke up. She insisted that the supposed cheater wouldn't be able to claim the sacred darkness anyway. In her view, the fact that Christian hadn't emerged after 2 whole days meant only one thing: he was already dead. She claimed that no one could absorb that much darkness and survive. Even the former clan head had hit a wall. To imagine Christian doing better. Ridiculous, she said. She declared that once the sacred ground was finished with him, there wouldn't even be a body left. But underneath her calm voice was something uglier, burning rage. She was furious, because if, by some miracle, Christian was still alive, she intended to kill him herself. When her father died fighting the Alliance, she and her brother Luan had been taken in by their uncle, Viscount Langham. Their standing in the clan had always been fragile. And now that Loin had failed to claim the sacred darkness, their position was crumbling. With his failure, no one would take Luan seriously as a successor anymore. And Jupian? She had already made up her mind. Christian would pay for what he'd done. She was unhinged, fully consumed by her vendetta. Even the servants couldn't help but gossip. Most of them believed the Khazar bastard was long dead, his greed finally catching up with him. The idea of someone absorbing the sacred darkness alone seemed laughable. His maid, Marie, the Banshee, had been waiting outside the sacred ground without rest. The others joked that the ghost of her dead master would soon meet the ghostly maid. Their laughs didn't last long. Marie came close to decapitating one of them for speaking out of turn. She was restless, her patience thin, but she would not tolerate anyone mocking her master. If she heard one more insult, she swore she'd turn the lot of them into ghost puppets. The truth was simpler than her threats. She just wanted to see her master again. No matter how powerful he was, a man who kept a lady waiting like this, he was seriously uncool. Speaking of the one fueling the storm of rumors outside, Christian was currently suspended in a suffocating void of absolute darkness. Each breath felt like it clawed its way out of him. He had just crossed the 70% mark of absorption, an incredible feat, but still a long road ahead. The process was grueling, far more intense than he had predicted, yet he had no intention of giving up. He reminded himself that the real trial wouldn't even begin until he hit 90%. That was the threshold where the sacred darkness started pushing back. He understood the danger all too well. Exceed the body's natural limit and his core would rupture. That would be the end of everything. He couldn't afford to die here, not before rewriting the path of history. He was the main character, after all. Then a thought struck him. There was one secret weapon he hadn't yet used. A dragon heart. Dragons, legendary beings of pure power, possessed the largest natural energy containers in existence. In his past life, he had learned to mimic the internal structure of a dragon's heart, albeit briefly. He decided it was time to bring that trick back. As he reconstructed his heart to resemble that of a mythical beast, the pace of absorption spiked dramatically. The darkness funneled into him with ferocity, pulled in by his newly forged heart. He was drawing close to the edge now, his absolute limit. Just as the pressure threatened to crush him, a voice he recognized rang out. It was soft, smooth, yet laced with eerie power. The first seed of Gehenna's seventh realm had appeared, Mefina, breathtaking and unnerving in equal measure. By the laws of the world, a demon of her stature shouldn't have been able to manifest here. But Mefina explained otherwise. She stated that her body was formed entirely from pure darkness, and in this domain, that made her more at home than anyone. The laws of nature bent for her, not the other way around. She said that because of this, she could aid him, freely, without bargains, contracts, or hidden costs. Christian had never encountered anything like this in his relentless war against demonic entities. Help, without strings. Mefina seemed amused by his hesitation. She told him that she acted purely on impulse, that her motivations were fleeting, whimsical. There was no agenda. All he had to do was take her hand, and finish what he started. 1 week passed. Out in the estate's courtyard, the elder clan head was sipping tea under a shaded pavilion. Simon standing quietly nearby, tending to his duties. The mood was heavy with the weight of silence. Even the elder, once the boy's staunchest advocate, was starting to doubt. A whole week without news. Aunt Marion voiced her concern, saying she couldn't fathom how such a clever young man could fall victim to blind greed. Simon relayed the growing consensus among the High Council. Viscount Langham in particular had been pushing to close the sacred ground permanently. They were all waiting for the clan head's decision. But the old man hated being cornered, especially by brats he considered beneath him. He threw a sharp remark at Simon, calling him a blood drinker, clearly annoyed. Still, he asked for his honest opinion. Simon replied that while the odds of survival were almost non-existent, he couldn't quite bring himself to count Christian out. The boy was different, peculiar, driven, worth betting on. Hearing that, the elder clan head made up his mind. He granted a final one-day extension. Viscount Langham would have to wait. If Christian was coming back, it would be within the next 24 hours. Aunt Marion exhaled quietly, the smallest hint of hope flickering in her chest. Now, all eyes turned to the sacred ground. The only question left was whether the boy would simply survive, or shatter the record of the first Demon King. In the dark energy dimension, Christian was in agony, clutching his chest as if trying to hold his heart together. The sacred darkness he was absorbing felt too vast for even his enhanced core to contain. The reservoir he'd built, modeled after the legendary Rastnaga, was straining under the pressure. His determination to endure might end up killing him. Mefina, the first seed of Gehenna's seventh realm, appeared before him once more. The devil offered aid, saying all Christian had to do was take her hand. She expressed fascination with him, yet frustration quickly followed. She claimed he was too proud, too stubborn, and if he refused her help, his death would be nothing but wasted potential. But Christian didn't budge. He refused to accept aid from demons. That was his line. He reminded her, voice full of defiance, that the people of the Dark Clan were feared for a reason. Their blood carried devil lineage, imperfect, perhaps, but powerful in its own right. Then something changed. Mefina's eyes widened in shock as Christian's body began to glow faintly white. She watched as his appearance shifted. His eyes lost their human quality, replaced by something ancient and powerful. Waves of energy rippled from him, a signature she found hauntingly familiar. She realized what he had done. Christian had activated a forbidden technique of the Dark Clan, a transformation designed to reshape a human body into a devil's vessel. It was originally meant to allow humans to carry powerful mantras their bodies couldn't otherwise withstand. The cost was immense, often fatal, but Christian had altered the formula. With precision and genius, he removed the aspects that overcharged dark energy and rebuilt the technique to enhance his body alone. The result was staggering. A vessel stronger than a human's, but not wholly devil either. He had sidestepped the cost, kept the power, and used it to absorb more dark energy than anyone thought possible. Mafina was furious, yet transfixed. She hadn't imagined a human could mimic the form of the Black Sabbath, the highest devil form known. She questioned aloud how an insect could imitate a god. Christian, grinning through the aftermath of his transformation, told her exactly who he was. He declared that he wasn't just another prodigy. He was a singular genius, unmatched in this world. With the absorption complete, he announced he was leaving. He would never align with devils, who treated humans like playthings. He hated them all, and always had. Mafina's fury turned into fascination. She promised they'd meet again, whatever it took. Christian didn't care. In his past life, he had been known as the hunter of 1,000 devils. He despised their kind. Before the dimension collapsed behind him, Christian left Mafina a parting gift, a reminder of the human who defied her. Mafina only laughed, amused and intrigued by this arrogant outlier. Stepping back into the physical world, Christian wondered how much time had passed. He was curious but calm, aware that his return would stir chaos. He reverted to human form without consequence, a testament to his genius. Now, he had no intention of bowing to the main family. In fact, ignoring them entirely seemed like the best idea. News of his return spread quickly. Shock rippled through the clan. Most had assumed him dead, his body consumed by darkness. They had only kept the gate open at the request of the Supreme Lord himself, Langham de Baron, one of the most powerful figures on the throne. And now, Christian was back, alive, whole, changed, and more dangerous than ever. Rumors spread quickly. Christian was alive but barely holding on. Heller confirmed his core was in chaos. The dark energy inside him was unstable, tangled beyond recognition. His recovery was uncertain, and even if he lived, using that energy again might be impossible. Langham's supporters were outraged. They claimed Christian's greed had squandered the sacred darkness that should have empowered the other young heirs. To them, he had destroyed a once-in-a-generation ceremony, and they demanded consequences. Only Langham remained composed outwardly, though he carefully took note of every accusation whispered behind closed doors. Once the crowd dispersed, Langham sought confirmation. Though usually calm and calculated, this time his composure cracked. His personal guard confirmed what had already been said. Christian's core had indeed suffered, and the chaos in his energy was real. The boy had pushed past every natural limit. Langham couldn't believe that someone so overlooked had shattered his carefully laid plans. Worse, the clan's supreme elder, his own father, had taken an interest in Christian. A small fish had jumped the current, threatening to redirect the entire river. Now, Langham had no choice. He ordered Christian to be brought to the Dark Chamber, where he would publicly announce the boy's expulsion and symbolic disposal. To Langham, Christian was a bug. What he failed to see was that this bug was turning into a storm. Unaware of the rumors swirling around him, Christian woke and answered Langham's summons. He understood perfectly. This wasn't a meeting. It was an execution dressed in ceremony. Langham had gathered key figures to witness his fall from grace. Langham began immediately, accusing Christian of sinning against the dark ritual. Christian, calm and slow in his words, asked for clarification. Langham demanded he explain what had occurred inside the chamber of pure dark energy. But Christian didn't bother to defend himself. Instead, he doubled down on his arrogance, declaring that none of the other heirs deserved their titles. He claimed to have beaten them all, mercifully sparing them when he could have crushed them outright. He even asked, with cold sarcasm, if the others could still walk. The comment sparked outrage, and one of the clan's senior members stood, incensed. Langham, however, silenced the room. He reminded everyone that Christian had monopolized the clan's most sacred resource yet showed nothing to justify the privilege. To him, Christian had gained everything but offered nothing in return. What Langham didn't know was that the result he feared most wasn't failure, but what Christian would do next. Christian smiled coldly as he dismissed the accusations. He said that unlike the other heirs, he had controlled the sacred darkness and earned the right to dethrone them. Langham, trying to maintain composure, informed the audience that Christian had absorbed 70% pure dark energy during the ritual, an impressive but dangerous feat. Christian, unfazed, asked what punishment awaited if he had failed to reach the target, then asked what happened if he had exceeded it. Langham, now speaking as the acting Supreme Lord, declared that Christian would be permanently banned from learning clan techniques, forbidden from stepping into the main house, and stripped of any inheritance within the Khazar family. Despite the crushing sentence, Christian stayed relaxed and even questioned how such judgment could be fair when Langham had no way of measuring his true power. That's when Langham's son stepped forward, challenging Christian to a duel of dark energy purity, a direct test where strength alone would speak. Though Christian's core was still recovering, he accepted. He knew the risk. Losing would likely destroy his core, but victory would silence every doubt and force the clan to recognize him as a legitimate heir candidate. Langham's son, presenting himself as a brother, promised to hold back, though Christian knew better. The duel wasn't for honor, it was a chance to crush him. In the clan, everyone possessed dark energy, but only those who underwent the sacred ritual gained purity. A duel of this type, an 8th energy clash, measured that purity. The stronger one's essence, the faster their opponent would collapse. They stepped into the ring. Christian activated his 2-star level dark energy, knowing that only purity would tip the balance now. Their energies collided mid-air, clashing in blinding waves. Christian smiled, taunting his opponent to stop pretending and focus on himself. His arrogance irritated Langham's son, who now burned to prove Christian's pride unfounded. He attacked hard with 8th energy, but Christian absorbed it with ease, not even retaliating. This unnerved the young master, who ramped up his strength to a higher level, trying to break through. Still, Christian didn't budge. Though the power level rose to 4 stars and formed the image of a snarling wolf, it couldn't touch him. Christian finally mocked his opponent, saying he had expected more from someone hailed as the next clan lord. Enraged by the insult, Langham's son pushed beyond his limits, hurling a monstrous wave of energy. The spectators gasped. This wasn't a duel anymore, it was an execution attempt. Many expected Christian to fall, maybe even die. But when Christian's 8th energy responded, it dwarfed the attack completely. His energy manifested as a devil's hand, massive and overwhelming, consuming the wolf entirely. Langham's son panicked. Bound by the duel's spiritual tether, he felt his core on the verge of collapse. He broke the connection to save himself, resulting in a violent backlash and blood loss. Christian stood victorious, though slightly disappointed that he hadn't been able to fully destroy his opponent's core. The young master, still bleeding, laughed weakly and said he suspected Christian's purity level had reached at least 90%. Shock rippled through the room. No one had expected such a result. Christian had proven himself not just capable, but dominant. Now, he wasn't just a nuisance. He was a real contender for clan leadership. Langham had tried to crush a pest and instead awakened a predator, one that now threatened everything he had built. The head informs Chris that, as promised, he will be allowed to take the test of the young lord. However, he adds that no member of a branch family has ever taken the test before. As acting head, he declares that he will select a trial at random for Chris. Chris interprets this as a veiled threat, believing the man intends to assign him a test designed to be impossible. The head explains that Chris's qualifications will be judged at 2 stages. First, he must demonstrate his talent, and next, he must accomplish a feat worthy of a young lord. Chris asks how he's supposed to prove his talent. The head responds that Chris must reach 3 stars within 3 months. Chris replies with a grin, asking if that's all, boasting that he's a genius, so it won't be difficult. The man stays silent for a moment, then says that he's looking forward to seeing what Chris accomplishes in that time. Later that day, in a quiet chamber, the 2 turds of the clan sit across from each other. As one sips his tea, disappointment flickers across his face. He says that Eskid is to blame for underestimating Chris, and as a result, even his core suffered damage. Now, he insists, they must act before Chris grows into a genuine threat. He tells the Eskid not to worry, reminding him why they deliberately refrain from absorbing more than 70% of the pure dark energy. He explains that the higher the purity of dark energy absorbed, the more difficult it becomes to raise its rank. Progress slows exponentially. He emphasizes that reaching just 3 stars will take far longer than normal under these conditions. Then he asks his junior what he thinks will happen now that Chris has absorbed 90%. No matter how gifted Chris may be, he says, that wall is one no one has ever climbed alone. Meanwhile, in another part of the mansion, Marie serves Chris a meal. She tells him that the news of his performance has spread and that he has made her proud. Her heart races for him. Chris replies that she's embarrassing him. She says that while she waited for him, she finally came to understand her true feelings. Every day without him felt like an eternity. These words stir something in Chris. He remembers the past. He remembers the fox girl, her concern evident. The saintess, Rania, reassures her that with Chris's agility, he couldn't possibly be hurt. Rania then tells Chris to give her his hand. The fox girl snaps that she could have just said she was worried. Embarrassed, she adds that even the hero was concerned about him. Chris smiles at the memory, thinking how his life used to be soaked in blood and betrayal, surrounded by kin who wanted nothing but his death. Now, for the first time, he's met people who burn with warmth. As Marie prepares her usual blood juice, Chris thanks her for waiting for him, for staying. She blushes, saying that he's finally realized how she truly feels. She tries to act composed, but her heart races. Chris jokes that she doesn't even have a heart to begin with. She responds with a cheesy line, saying that it was stolen by him. He tells her that since she waited, she deserves a reward. A walk with him. Her reaction is explosive. She gets dressed with ridiculous speed and excitement. As they walk together, Chris thinks it's good to relax now and then. But the pressure remains. He still has to reach 3 stars in 3 months. Even with the help of the Branch family's tutors, managing over 90% dark energy on his own is no small feat. Just then, a voice interrupts his thoughts, accusing him of wasting time stirring up trouble. Turning around, he sees his aunt. She greets him coldly and questions whether he should really be wandering the garden without direction. She asks if he's found a teacher. He asks if it's her, only to be disappointed when she says no. She shocks him further by saying it's someone else entirely. Chris tells Marie to go ahead, promising to meet her at dinner. As they descend a staircase, he admits he doesn't know who this teacher is but thanks his aunt for thinking of him. She says he shouldn't be thankful yet. He'll see why soon enough. She elaborates that the teacher in question is harsh. None of her siblings were able to keep up with his methods. She warns Chris that this is a rare opportunity. He must not squander it. At the bottom of the stairs, Chris freezes. A small boy stands in front of him. Confused, Chris asks if the kid is lost. He pats the boy's head and asks where his parents are. But the boy's glare is unnerving. Chris suddenly realizes his mistake. His aunt sternly tells him to show respect. This is the incarnation of the clan head. The boy examines Chris, then gives him a formal greeting. As dark energy radiates from Chris, the elder is taken aback. He notes that Chris has absorbed more than 90%. He admits that it's an impressive feat, but also a foolish one. Chris doesn't argue. The boy, now more serious, says that even with 80% sacred darkness, he had faced walls taller than mountains. He claims that their progenitor never would have reached his level without the favor of the Demon Emperor. He says that Chris's path will be even more brutal. He then offers to return a portion of Chris's dark energy to Ether, saying that with Chris's talent, he can easily handle 80%. Anything beyond that is simple greed. Before he can finish, Chris interrupts with a question. Why has the Dark Clan grown so weak? His aunt looks alarmed, but the boy raises no objection. With a calm expression, he says that compared to the Mystic Magic Clan and the Undead Magic Clan, the so-called heavens above the heavens, the Dark Clan is still seen as the weakest of the 12 noble clans. He then asks Chris if he knows why. Chris replies that while the clan has flourished under the current head's leadership, others claim they're shadows of their former selves. There can be only one reason. He explains that the clan lacks high-ranking individuals at the absolute stage, those beyond 8-star power. The elder boy falls silent. Chris continues, predicting that in the future, when the Demon King of Carnage attacks the Dark Clan, Nordian will already be dead. The clan will only have a handful of 7-star warriors and not a single 8-star. Alongside 10,000 soldiers, they will fight, but ultimately fall, becoming slaves. That, he declares, is the weight carried by those at the absolute stage, and there's no way the elder head doesn't feel that burden already. The old child nods solemnly, stating that he understands Chris's intentions clearly. However, he voices a deep concern that the sheer weight of the pure dark energy might end up crushing Chris entirely, preventing him from ever evolving further. Chris, undeterred, questions whether the clan head isn't even a little curious. He asks if the power he's shouldering will merely serve to strengthen the clan, or if he will surpass every trial and ascend into a being of boundless power, capable of ruling above all. The kid bursts out laughing, remarking that Chris certainly has a way with words. He then assures him he won't regret this choice. With a surge of dark energy gathering under his feet, Chris is engulfed by a spiraling vortex. In mere seconds, the darkness swallows him, and when he regains consciousness, he finds himself standing in a dense forest. A voice echoes through the trees, declaring that his first task is to inherit the pure dark energy. Chris is baffled, but the voice says simply that he must survive. Behind him, a low growl rumbles. Chris turns to find a two-headed bear glaring at him with bloodshot eyes. Assessing the situation, Chris realizes he's in serious danger. From afar, an orb flickers, used by the elders to observe him. His aunt quickly recognizes the setting and accuses the clan head of throwing a 2-star child into a 4-star magic beast's territory. In response, the old child casually summons another rock lizard. Apologetically, she mutters that her earlier words must have made things worse for Chris. The elder calmly says that Chris, as he fights for his life, will begin to understand the true essence of pure dark energy. He believes that nothing teaches faster or deeper than standing on the edge of death. He adds that he hopes Chris doesn't suffer any permanent damage. Then, slumping into a couch, he calls out to Marion, asking if she has everything ready. She opens a box full of sweets. As he stuffs his mouth, he wonders aloud why dark energy usage always makes him crave sugar. Satisfied, he switches off the lights and murmurs that it's best to watch these things in the dark. Excitedly, he prepares to watch his grandson's performance unfold. In the forest, Chris faces both the twin-headed bear and the rock lizard. One misstep could mean death. The lizard spits a toxic fluid that disintegrates a nearby tree in seconds. Chris dodges, but knows full well this isn't just training, it's survival. He speaks aloud to the clan head, asking if he's watching. He says there's no way the leader would give him a challenge without a solution. If there's no clear answer, then he'll carve one himself, by defeating these creatures that far outclass him. His aunt watches in silence, suspecting the head just wants to see Chris tossed around. But Chris, full of confidence, says this will be easy. He readies himself for a one-hit finish. The fight begins. The bear charges, its speed and power nearly overwhelming. Chris barely avoids the first attack, thinking fast. He knows there must be a strategy to overcome them. The orb flickers as the elders observe. The regressed elder comments that Chris clearly has talent. His movement patterns are unlike any novice. Marion points out that, regardless, he's still just a child. Then, in a flash, the bear is down. They're stunned. Marion immediately calls Chris to ask how he defeated it so quickly. Chris explains that while the beast had formidable physical strength and defense, its speed and magic resistance were low. He exploited those weaknesses, delivering a precise burst of dark energy directly into its heart. Marion is shocked by the technique, but before she can say more, the red-haired elder appears, proudly stating that Chris used Dark Death, a technique he personally favors. He seems pleased, declaring that it's one of his all-time favorites. Meanwhile, Chris turns to the second threat, the rock lizard. It lunges at him without warning. He evades the first strike, but the second head fires another venomous projectile. He barely avoids it. Chris quickly evaluates the creature. It has 3 hearts, and unless he destroys all of them simultaneously, it will continue to regenerate. He needs a different strategy. He channels his dark energy into rope-like strands, binding the beast in place. Then, unleashing immense force, he crushes all 3 hearts at once. The monster collapses, shattered from within. The red-haired elder exclaims that Chris has used a refined version of dark destruction. The old man squints, saying he can't see clearly and demands Marion step aside. He gets more animated, asking if she taught Chris this. She quickly denies any involvement, insisting she has no idea how Chris learned it. He scoffs, saying it's not something that can just be learned. The redhead counters that if that's true, there's no point in teaching dark magic at all. The clan leader remains silent, watching. With the battle concluded, Chris is pulled back into the real world. A sly smile forms on his face as he comments that the experience forced him to think critically, calling it a valuable lesson and giving credit to the clan head. Marion and the red head stay silent, while Chris adds that it's thanks to the head's challenge that he discovered how to apply dark magic independently. He acknowledges that his pride is intact, but now he's ready to begin formal training. He orders the others to leave. They obey without protest. As they exit, Marion privately worries that this new teacher might be too much, even for Chris. The elder tells Chris that before they begin the first magic transfer, he has a question. What does Chris think dark magic is? Chris answers boldly, saying that it's about overwhelming the opponent with perfect dark energy. The elder questions him further, asking what exactly he means by perfect darkness. Chris freezes. He doesn't have an answer. With a serious expression, the elder tells him to pay attention. He unlocks something unseen. The ground trembles as dark energy begins to flood the room. He declares that this is the origin of all darkness. The stairway to the 12 abyss opens before them. He says Chris must descend, devour the Lord shrouded in shadow, and walk the path of true darkness. As the energy gathers at his fingertips, a dagger of pure dark power forms in his hand. The old child waved his dagger with a lazy yet ominous motion, and Chris immediately felt the weight of that swing. It wasn't just a weapon. It felt like death itself. Just witnessing it, Chris could sense that if the blow had been directed at him, he would have been cleaved in half. The space behind him shattered from the pressure alone. He remembered with disturbing clarity how the blade had once grazed his neck, and even that phantom memory made it hard to breathe. The clan head explained that the weapon wasn't a mere blade, it was an idea. A concept that only cut what it chose to cut, it wasn't bound by physical rules. As the black sword vanished into nothingness, the old child prepared to leave. He stated that Chris had 1 month. Within that time, he was expected to sharpen the black sword he had just witnessed. No instructions. No guidance. Just a demand. And with that, the elder disappeared, leaving Chris standing alone, confused and slightly frustrated. The vague tasks, the cryptic instructions. It all felt like a joke. The next morning, Chris pushed himself hard. He sprinted around the training grounds at full speed before dropping into one-armed push-ups until sweat poured down his back. Muscles ached, and his shirt clung to him, sticking to the lines forming on his back. For a brief moment, he imagined himself ripped and imposing, a warrior sculpted from battle and struggle. But it was just a dream. In reality, he was still lean and wiry, with the body of a stubborn rookie not yet hardened by time. Shaking off the fantasy, he sat down cross-legged and fell into meditation. He reminded himself that there was work to be done. Energy gathered in his hands, a dark mist forming and condensing into a dagger. But the shape shattered before it could solidify. Another failure. He let out a breath. He'd lost count of how many times it had gone wrong. Even when the blade formed, it lasted only 10 seconds at most, and it still felt like a pale imitation of the clan head's black sword. That weapon had radiated something primal, pure darkness in its oldest form. He recalled the elder's cryptic words. Climb the deep stairs, and the 12 abysses will await you. Crow seeking wisdom. Accept it and praise it. He kept turning that phrase over and over in his head. There had to be a hidden meaning buried in it. Exactly 1 month later, Marion and the regressed elder descended the steps toward the training grounds. The old man commented that by now, Chris should have failed enough times to understand his limits. He then asked Marion if she was really that concerned about the boy. Marion admitted that she thought there had to be a quicker path forward. With the successor's test only 2 months away, time was short. The elder replied bluntly. With the level of purity Chris had absorbed, rapid growth was impossible. Forcing it would only lead to him hitting a massive, immovable wall. The only option was to strengthen the foundation first. But as they arrived and caught sight of Chris, the elder froze in place. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Chris stood before them with a black dagger of dark energy held steady in his hand. Chris smirked and said that he figured the old man would show up soon. Then he thanked the clan head, stating that it was only because of his guidance that he reached the 3-star level ahead of schedule. But before he could finish speaking, the sword flickered and vanished from his grip. Chris admitted that faking it was still the best he could manage. It had taken him a full week to manifest the black sword, but even now it felt like nothing more than a shell. Still, he had figured something out. He explained that the incantation, 12 abysses, meant the black sword had to contain the 12 elemental attributes of mana. That was the true form. That was what he had been chasing. Hearing this, the elder was stunned. Not only had Chris met his expectations, but he had surpassed them entirely. He had uncovered the full depth of the challenge. The elder revealed that it normally took a year just to manifest a basic black sword, and many never even approached the understanding of all 12 mana types. To comprehend and awaken the true black sword in less than a month was unheard of. He looked at Chris and said nothing for a moment. Then he smiled, a rare expression from someone who had long forgotten how. He told Chris to be ready. Starting tomorrow, the real teachings would begin, and they would not be kind. But Chris wasn't worried. Instead, he was brimming with confidence. He said that he trusted the clan head fully. With the first hurdle behind him, Chris felt like celebrating. A mischievous grin spread across his face as he darted toward the wine cellar. He danced through the corridors, jumping and spinning like a man who had just broken through his own limits. Inside the winery, he acted like a madman, tossing bottles in the air, laughing to himself. He poured a glass of liquor so expensive he would have never even dared to dream about it before. He figured it was best to enjoy it now, before Marie showed up and snatched it away. Just then, a voice called out to him. He turned to see a pretty face glaring at him. She told him that once again, he was drinking in broad daylight like the fool he always was. Chris studies the girl in front of him with a critical eye. Judging by her striking eye color, he notes that she doesn't belong to the Dark family. His expression remains composed as he calmly asks if she knows who he is. The moment the words leave his mouth, her demeanor shifts dramatically, and her attendant stares in disbelief. She demands to know what he means by that question, her tone sharp and insulted. Then, without warning, she strikes him with mana-infused force. The blow sends Chris crashing to the ground. Her attendant steps in, urging her to stop, saying there's no reason to involve herself with someone as worthless as him. She turns away, brushing him off like dust. But before she can leave, the old man from the earlier examination strolls in and casually picks up the wine bottle Chris had been enjoying. Chris rises, furious, his pride burning. He demands to know who this woman thinks she is. The old man responds simply, "She is Princess Marissa of the Venom clan." The name hits Chris like a thunderclap. His anger drains, replaced by awkward realization. That name, that title. She might very well be his fiancée, or rather, his former fiancée. He suddenly finds himself in a complicated situation, unsure if he's just offended royalty or reopened a wound from the past. Meanwhile, Marissa storms down the corridor, her fury visible in every step. Her expression is cold, but her thoughts are tangled in old memories. A flashback plays in her mind. She's 8 years old, crouched on the ground playing with ants while noble voices murmur around her. She remembers how everyone dismissed her. They whispered that she was just the illegitimate child. That the Duke, having given up on his incompetent son, was trying to marry her off to the Dark family for political gain. Marissa hadn't cared much back then, her focus was on the ants, until she sensed someone nearby. She looked up to find Chris standing before her, curious. He asked why a kid like her was sitting alone. It was their first meeting, and even then, she found herself slightly charmed. Chris had the looks, and the air of someone different. She snapped back, saying she wasn't a kid. Her name was Marissa. He surprised her by calling her by name, and then introduced himself as the son of Count Hazar. He told her to ignore the adults and suggested she pay them back once she grew up. At first, she was stunned by his boldness. Then she responded with fire, declaring that she would become the strongest demon and crush anyone who looked down on her. Even the old version of Chris had been impressed. He blushed, remarking that she had ambition fitting for a true dark demon. Standing tall, he reached out to her, calling her the future strongest demon lady. He asked if she would honor him with a tour of the Dark family's estate. She turned beet red at his gallant offer. But now, in the present, she tries to bury those memories. The engagement had been arranged for political peace between their families. That hopeful version of her, the one who dreamt of a future with him, is long gone. She has heard the rumors about his bad behavior, and the disappointment makes her eyes sting with tears she refuses to let fall. Moments later, she arrives at the patriarch's office. The family head greets her formally and asks for the purpose of her visit. Marissa states that a relic has appeared in the neutral zone between the two clans. She reminds him that the Venom clan took the last relic and asks if he intends to concede this one as well. He presses her, asking if her clan will give up this time. But Marissa firmly says that won't happen. She counters by asking if he would surrender if the roles were reversed. With a diplomatic tone, he remarks that she's seeking fair competition. She proposes that both families send a team, and whoever finds the relic first gets to keep it. To prevent full-blown conflict, she suggests the teams be limited to 10 demons each, capped at the 3-star level. She justifies the rule, stating that unnecessary losses would only benefit their enemies, especially with the unstable situation among the 4 kings. The patriarch agrees, tapping his fingers on the table before saying he accepts her terms. Marissa pauses. His easy compliance makes her suspicious. She asks what the catch is. He adds a condition. If the Venom clan breaks the agreement, by using tricks or sabotage, then the Dark family will claim this relic and the one they lost last time. He defines cheating as anything underhanded. Traps, ambushes, manipulation. Given her reputation for cunning strategies, she listens carefully. With a serious tone, she assures him that no foul play will occur and accepts the added condition. Then the patriarch asks whether she plans to lead the Venom clan's team herself. She confirms that she will. He nods, saying he looks forward to witnessing the famed 10,000 Venom at work. As she leaves, she gives a final bow and says they will await the Dark family's team on the day of the expedition. Once she's gone, the patriarch remains still for a moment. Then, slowly rising from his seat, he approaches the chessboard in the corner. With quiet intensity, he picks up the Black King and knocks over the White Queen. As the king stands alone on the board, he stares down at it and mutters that a stage of blood and screams is now set for Marissa. Time passed, and the seasons change. While Chris threw himself into relentless training, others also began shifting their paths. Some struggled with feelings for love already lost, while those defeated in competition found themselves left behind. At the same time, jealousy festered, its bearers sharpening their blades in silence. Others moved with purpose, acting toward the future still unseen. A mysterious figure chose to remain hidden, while several others stepped forward with their own ambitions. Chris eventually came face to face with the ineffectual leader, who told him bluntly that he would need to prove his worth. Seizing the moment, Chris summoned his dark blade. At the sight of it, his older brother's face darkened with rage. Chris observed their expression and thought to himself that it was absolutely priceless. The old man in strange garb warned him sternly not to reveal the true black sword. If he did, the leader might assign him an even more difficult task. The old man also added that Chris should act arrogant, as though being a genius entitled him to it. In the present moment, Chris smirked to himself and thought that he had held back today, just as he was advised. But he looked forward to seeing their expressions when the real shock hit. The patriarch then stated that he would recognize Chris's achievements and assign him the second test. He explained that demons would soon be sent to search for a relic that had appeared in the neutral zone. Since the Venom clan would also be participating, he said that if Chris earned merit there, he would acknowledge him as heir. Chris found it surprisingly easy sounding and asked if he would be going alone. The patriarch answered that he would be joining the unit led by the second princess, Jupian. He continued, saying that this mission had originally been Roin's. With arrogance, he added that this opportunity was beyond Chris's status, so he should treat it as an honor. Chris, wearing a serious expression, responded that he would follow orders. As he left, his patriarch brother spoke to their father, saying that he was concerned Chris would gain even more merit. But his words were cut off as the patriarch told him not to worry, assuring him that everything was going according to plan. He added that he should be prepared for when the moment arrived. As Chris stepped outside, he thought to himself that he had expected to be sent on a life-threatening mission. Still, something felt wrong, and as he recalled the patriarch's words, he wondered what had really happened to the original Roin in the previous timeline. Originally, Roin had been the one-named successor, not Christian, yet Chris had heard nothing of him during the Great War. In the past, Chris had been pushed by his fox waifu to rush and continuously pet her. If he stopped, she said, she wouldn't tell him something important, so he was forced to follow her demands. She explained that it was about the demon amulet incident, a relic conflict between the Dark family and the Venom clan. It wasn't a matter widely known to outsiders. Even though the Dark family's squad was wiped out during the relic expedition, the Venom clan suffered casualties too. Yet, oddly enough, both sides kept quiet about the whole event. What mattered, she told him, was that this incident marked the start of disaster. She said that Nordian was killed by his own subordinate, Marquis Rangham. If that hadn't happened, the bloodletting Demon King wouldn't have conquered the Dark family so easily. So the amulet incident had accelerated the age of destruction. The destruction of the Dark family squad meant that Roin, who was originally meant to be on the Fed list, was replaced by Chris. But without hard proof, it was too dangerous to act on that knowledge. Right now, Chris was only a 3-star. There wasn't much he could do. That's why the best thing to do was to be ready. He needed to head outside. Jupian tells Chris to wait and demands to know where he thinks he's going with that kind of attitude. Chris responds by saying that it shouldn't concern her where he goes. She says that she heard he's joining the exploration team again this time. She admits that she doesn't like it but adds that he'll be covering for Roin. Hearing this, Chris replies that he won't have to do anything right away anyway. She insults him further, calling him an idiot who wouldn't have done anything immediately in the first place. At her brother being insulted, she throws her dagger at a blazing speed. Chris catches the dagger's movement clearly and, with smooth control, dodges it without even blinking. Seeing how effortlessly he moved, she becomes visibly shocked. Chris remarks that the greeting was more than enough. He adds that since they clearly can't stand each other, they should stay out of each other's sight. Without giving her time to respond, he states that he has business to attend to. As she retrieves her blade, she grows irritated. She realizes that not only did he follow the movement with his eyes, but he didn't even dodge in a way that showed any concern. She knows he did it on purpose, and the thought makes her suspect he may be even more dangerous than she originally believed. With no particular task at hand, Chris wanders through the city. He picks up a beer and attempts to down it in one go, but before he can, the innkeeper pulls it away from his mouth. Later, he heads over to a gambling table and ends up winning a large sum of money. The former pauper runs around gleefully, clutching more meat sticks than he can hold, depressing the small child next to him. Chris thinks to himself that it's been a while since he had a break, and now he can finally live a lazy life for a bit. While continuing to stuff himself with meat, he thinks the shop he's been looking for should be nearby. But first, he needs to deal with the pest following him. He thinks it's a pain, especially since they seem like people sent by the patriarch. Suddenly, a mysterious figure grabs him and tells him to stay quiet. As he turns to look, he sees a strikingly pretty girl. Chris asks who she is, but instead of answering, she says that someone was tailing her, though her subordinates already dealt with them. Chris wonders how that's supposed to be reassuring, especially as she had gagged and dragged him here without explanation. When he asks again who she is, she replies with something vague about the Four Kings' dominion. Chris is visibly shocked at the mention. She explains that she's someone working to stop the unrest spreading throughout the dominion. She says they should move elsewhere and asks if he will join her. Chris pauses for a moment, then tells her to lead the way. As they make their way deep into the alleys, Chris asks how far they intend to go. She continues speaking, saying that demons across the king's domain are vanishing without a trace. Even the safe zones within the city are being torn apart, day by day. She points out that Chris should already know the dominion is crippled by the conflict between the three major families. In a land ruled by force, she says, the family heads care little for the lives of ordinary demons. That's why she believes purging the criminal forces will require the cooperation of multiple families. She admits she cannot ask for support empty-handed, so in exchange, she offers information that could help stabilize the Dark family. She claims that Marquis Rangham is conspiring with a high-ranking member of the Venom clan, and together, they plan to assassinate Princess Marissa of the Venom clan. Chris reacts with shock and unease, realizing that not only is he being targeted, but Marissa is now in danger too. He struggles to understand their motives. If both families lose their central figures, then the agitators in the Dominion will become even more emboldened. The balance between the 12 demon clans will crumble, and the resulting chaos will be even more devastating. That, she says, is why she wants him to prepare thoroughly for the upcoming expedition. As she reveals her face with fiery determination, she says she hopes that he will rise as the Dark family's successor and stand against those threatening peace. Chris remains confused, especially since she's even aware of the Relic expedition. He quietly praises their intel for uncovering that detail. Chris, keeping a straight face, asks her why he should trust anything she says when she has no proof. He adds that if she wants cooperation, she needs to put something of value on the line. She is caught off guard by the blunt demand, standing momentarily speechless. Chris, however, is intentionally pushing her to back off if she can't offer any collateral. She hurriedly tells him to wait and pulls something out from beneath her robe. Chris's expression changes instantly to shock, falling silent as he looks at what she reveals. After bidding her farewell, he turns and walks away. At the same time, a figure emerges silently from her shadow. She speaks to it, explaining that she cannot show her true self to Chris yet. The demonic figure responds that it's for her own protection. If Chris ends up in danger and reveals her identity or information, it will only worsen the situation. As she begins transforming, she tells the figure that for now, she'll watch from the sidelines and that her name is Idrin. Meanwhile, Chris walks away at a normal pace but suddenly bursts into wild laughter. She had given him a VIP card, exactly what he had been searching for. The Dark Auction House, a secret hub for smuggled relics and rare creatures, only issued entry cards to nobles or verified wealthy buyers. Back during the hero party's time, none of them had such a card, making entry almost impossible. The card was issued under the name Rhea de Wolfman, a name Chris had never heard before. He thinks back on everything that just happened, but decides it's still too early to trust her completely. For now, it's better to continue preparing for the expedition. Chris approaches a man and says that he wants to send a carrier pigeon. The man tells him to write the message, and they will send it. Chris scribbles something unreadable as a cute owl takes flight. Watching it go, he mutters to himself that this part is done. Now it's time to pay a visit to a certain someone, sarcastically referencing the man's Barbie outfit. Chris, after donning a flashy mask and transforming into a dandy figure, makes his way to the black market. However, he gets stopped by a random man who says this place isn't meant for people like him and that he should leave. Not wanting to waste time with nonsense, Chris pulls out the card and asks if the man will still talk like that after seeing this. The man, stunned by the card, tries to recover his composure. He quickly apologizes and offers to show him the way inside. Once inside, Chris finds the entire place brimming with luxury items. While walking through, he casually collects aura points. An attendant, shocked by his presence, greets him and asks if he really is Rhea de Wolfman. Chris answers that for today, yes, he is Rhea de Wolfman, and asks if there's a problem. Though the attendant doesn't buy it, especially since Chris's voice clearly sounds masculine. He decides not to press it and simply says never mind. Chris brings him back to focus by asking if he can be escorted to the branch manager. The man freezes in place for a moment, overwhelmed. Chris waves the card again and demands if he didn't hear him the first time. He tells him to go and bring the branch manager immediately. The man then hurries out, leaving Chris seated in a luxurious room. Looking around, Chris says that everything here is top tier, which makes sense considering this is the Rudolph Merchant Guild. The Rudolph Guild, a massive entity rivaling the Union's Deer Guild, is so influential that they control entire black markets and run all nearby trade routes in the Dark Empire. There's even a saying, if Rudolph can't get it, no one can. Soon, a new figure appears, a flamboyant femboy dressed in flashy clothes. He introduces himself as Rubid, the branch manager of the auction house and the head of the Rudolph Guild. As he sits down, he asks Chris if there's something specific he's looking for. Chris removes his mask and tells him to bring Rowena to him. Rubid is taken aback and asks what Chris means by that. Chris questions him back, asking if he doesn't know Rowena. Rubid, pretending to be clueless, says that Rowena is the guild master of the Deer Guild and that even the Rudolph Guild doesn't have the authority to summon a Union Guild master on demand. Chris's face darkens as he adopts a villainous expression, saying that can't be right. He continues, pointing out that Rowena is standing right there. Rubid goes completely silent at that. Trying to maintain the act, he stammers and asks what Chris is talking about. Chris, unfazed, replies that the relic must be working better than expected. He warns that since they'll be seeing each other often, it's time to stop pretending. With no other option left, Rubid removes the relic. His body begins to glow, and just like that, the femboy is revealed to be Rowena herself. She asks Chris how he figured it out. In response, he just keeps smiling like a madman. In his past life, he had messed up often, and she had taken his money without hesitation. But just last year, he had paid her back several times over. In the present, he says that she should feel ashamed to be using such a trash relic as the head of the Rudolph Guild. He adds that the disguise she's using is sloppy at best. Hearing Chris's words, she thinks to herself that this is how it should go. In reality, Chris is bluffing. He can't actually see through the relic's effect. But he keeps his poker face and keeps pressing. Then he continues to mock her, saying that maybe her face is just too big to hide properly. That offends her, and she snaps back, telling him to take a look at himself before criticizing others. She says he's no better, pointing out that he's not Rhea de Wolfman either. She remarks that lately, he's been getting a bit of a reputation in the Dark Empire. There's talk about his refined style and whatnot, but judging by this kind of behavior, she says he's still not there yet. She accuses him of using a stolen identity to enter a members-only operation. She adds that he can't complain if she decides to kick him out. Chris, now irritated, fires back by asking who exactly is threatening who. He warns her that he could easily spread rumors about how a Union rat is running shady business in the Dark Empire. Hearing that, she realizes she has no choice but to ask him what exactly it is that he wants from her. After a while, a smug Mario-like figure walks out, acting like he's just pulled off something great. In reality, he's been bled dry by Chris's negotiation tactics. Chris thinks to himself that he's gotten just enough out of her to make it worthwhile. She, on the other hand, thinks it was nothing but blackmail, but Chris says it's all in the name of saving the world, so she should be grateful. He knows this won't massively increase their power, but among all the random plans floating around, they might be able to counter a few with this. Elsewhere, a group of boys is training. As Chris walks away, one of the more talkative ones stops him and asks what he's doing wandering around again. They're deploying in 2 days, so he should be joining training. Chris says that he's goofed off the entire day and now he's just tired. He jokes that he plans to be as useless as Roin, so there's really no point in training. As he waves goodbye, the redhead among them looks irritated. But the smart one in the group tells him to let Chris be. There's nothing they can do to someone like that. Just look at his face. She tells the others that he isn't worth the opportunity being wasted on him, but deep down, she wonders why he doesn't want to earn merit. It will be his loss in the end, but she can't understand why he's acting so foolish. Later, Chris is with someone as they both stand quietly, staring at a patch of herbs. She asks what he plans to do with these. Chris replies that it's none of her business, his eyes fixed on the plants. She drops a wooden case in front of him. As it opens, it reveals an elegant-looking fan. She tells him that he's not really in a position to be picky these days. As Reina turns to leave, she tells Chris that she doesn't know what he's plotting, but her identity will remain hidden. Chris calmly responds that he'll see her soon. Hearing this, she replies that she would rather not see him again. With a cold tone, Chris calls her by both of her names and says that a war may break out soon. At that, she immediately stops and turns around. Chris continues, saying that she's someone who travels between the Union and the Dark Empire. So, she should already understand how unstable things are right now, If war breaks out, the routes between the two territories will be sealed. She'll have no choice but to cut ties with either the Union or the Empire, which would slash her profits in half. She says that what he's suggesting is a leap of faith, not something a child should be playing with. But Chris cuts her off, stating that given the recent rumors coming from the Dominion, it's not baseless talk. She thinks to herself that he has a point. The atmosphere lately has been anything but peaceful. There are many families in the Dominion pushing hard for war with the Union. As she reviews a letter in her possession, it clearly states that the Dark Clan is planning to initiate conflict with the Union. She turns to Chris and asks why he's telling her all of this. She reminds him that she's just a merchant, someone who doesn't have the power to stop a war. Chris agrees with her on that. But then he says that he wants her to become his sponsor. In return, he promises to ensure a future without war. She grows even more confused, asking how he plans to accomplish something like that. Chris explains that she should already know the Dominion would have to pass through the southern magic nation to wage war, right where the Dark family resides. But if he becomes the heir this time and prepares accordingly, they might be able to avoid the worst-case scenario. And that, he says, is her only chance to keep her profits from being cut in half. After finishing his sentence, Chris extends his hand toward her. As she looks into his eyes, she sees no sign of deceit. There's no hint of a liar behind that gaze. She thinks to herself that maybe investing in Chris isn't a complete waste after all. As their hands meet in a firm shake, she warns him that if he ever betrays her trust, even once, she's cutting all ties. Chris responds that he doesn't speak with two tongues. But in his mind, he quietly admits that there are enough reasons to take advantage of her if needed. As they part, he tells her to take care, calling her a money grub with a smirk. That evening, Chris is focused on transforming the herbs he gathered into something useful. He says to himself that with even a high-ranking figure from the Venom clan involved, there's no time to waste. He better make an antidote. It's been a long while since he last made one, and he wonders if his hands still remember how. As the herbs begin to boil over a special stove, his thoughts drift into the past. In a flashback, the scene shifts to the noble house of medicine, where a younger Chris is struggling to make medicine. Despite his effort, he keeps failing. Beside him, a sickly figure tells him to fan the flames harder. Her name is Ella, and she is the 26th head of the medicine clan. She tells Chris that some herbs only release their full effects when exposed to strong flames. Chris brushes off her comment, telling her not to nag him and to lie down. He remembers their first meeting clearly. It was on the battlefield during the First Great War. Even though she was still young, she had been forced onto the battlefield because the bloodletting Demon King had destroyed her clan. As the noble house of medicine was known as the best among the Union's 7 great houses in the healing arts, it had become a target. The Demon King saw them as a nuisance, and even Ella wasn't spared from his blade. Back in the present, Chris continues brewing the medicine as Ella watches him closely in the memory. She comments that no matter how she looks at him, he's a strange one. He had managed to recreate the clan's elixir with just a rough explanation. She feels a quiet sadness, thinking how unfortunate it is to have met someone like him this late and under such grim circumstances. Chris mocks her lightly, saying that this so-called noble house of saintly healers is led by someone frail and sick. She coughs and replies that the only reason she's still alive after the Demon King's attack is because of her own medicine. As blood stains her lips, she says that she doesn't have the luxury to lie around any longer. In a world filled with so much suffering, someone has to act. As Chris turns away, she tells him that it's tragic for the House of Medicine to end here. Hearing that, Chris avoids eye contact and tells her not to dwell on the past but to focus on recovering. She gives a faint smile and starts digging through a pile of books. She tells Chris that within one of the volumes lies the clan's secret knowledge. Only fragments of it survived the war, but she insists he take it. As her coughing worsens, Chris urges her to rest, but she grabs his hand and pleads with him to save those who suffer, in her place. If he can promise her that, then she will be able to rest peacefully. Chris remains silent for a moment, then tells her that he'll agree, on the condition that she lets him call her master. She smiles and says that someone like her, who couldn't even teach properly, doesn't deserve that title. But maybe, just maybe, she chose the right disciple after all. In that moment, as Chris embraces his new path, he is named the 27th head of the noble medicine clan. He reflects that since the books were damaged, he was never able to fully master the clan's secret techniques. But he traveled across war-torn battlefields to fulfill her dying wish. Because of that dedication, people came to call him the Saint of the Battlefield. As the pellet finally forms, he calls out to his master, saying that she must be living peacefully somewhere out there. He silently vows to keep the promise he made to her, even in this life. As an eagle soars across the sky, the scene shifts to Chris's original home. His father sits with a letter in hand. One that came from Chris. According to Chris's sister, Chris has obtained the Dark Core, just like he did. As his father reads the contents of the letter, his expression turns serious. He turns to his attendant and says that preparations must be made. His son will need them. Sometime later, Chris finds himself in the Biscan Mountains, a border zone between the Dark Clan and the Venom Clan. The area is known for the appearance of Class 4 or higher demonic beasts, making it dangerous for solo travelers. A member of the Dark Clan issues a strict order, declaring that no individual movement is allowed and that everyone must move in teams of at least 2. Christian, however, prefers to work alone. He dismisses the idea of moving at a slow pace with others, sarcastically remarking that if they continue at such a sluggish speed, the Venom Clan will have already cleared the area by the time they finish searching. Another member of the Dark Clan voices skepticism, suggesting that the Venom Clan might indeed beat them to their goal once again. Ignoring the warnings, Christian prepares to venture off on his own. A voice from behind warns him sharply, reminding him that this is a zone where high-level demonic beasts roam and that he shouldn't expect rescue if he gets into trouble. Christian doesn't react visibly to the warning, but internally, he notes the tone of the leader. As if recalling something, Chris offers him an antidote, claiming it counters the Venom Clan's poison. The latter declines, stating that he has already taken his own. Chris insists, saying that the antidote is far better than cheap alternatives and that he should take it even if he thinks it's a bluff. When the other refuses, Chris swallows them in his face. Suddenly, Marissa and her team shows up sarcastically asking if internal strife is already brewing. The leader calls her a slowpoke in return. A brief argument erupts. Marissa says that she's right on time and sarcastically asks if he should be praised for not cheating by scouting ahead. The other coldly reminds them of the rules. No setting traps or ambushing each other during the exploration. When she questions his curt tone, he remarks that they are enemies and questions whether they should speak formally. They approach each other threateningly with Marissa darkly stating that there is no need for that. The leader of the Dark Clan group barks an order for all members to move out, signaling the official start of the exploration. Marissa does the same and says that those who have checked their communicators are instructed to proceed. Christian, already ahead, doesn't wait for the others. Watching him, the leader sees that he ditched his communicator and wonders what he's thinking. As he moves deeper into the mountains, Chris reflects on his past life, recalling how he had roamed the Demonlands endlessly. His experience allows him to distinguish beast habitats with ease, even with his eyes closed. He knows that to find Class 4 beasts, he must go much further into the wilderness. He recalls the leader's warning not expect rescue if he gets in trouble and wonders if she was worried about. But he soon shakes his head in denial, thinking that she seems like she wouldn't bleed even if stabbed. His mind shifts back to the mission. He remembers that Marquis Langham's scheme must already be in motion, but so far, he hasn't spotted any assassins lurking in the shadows. His priority now is to find the relic before anyone else does. As he turns around, he comes face to face with Marissa, who is taken aback seeing him. An awkward silence follows. Christian suddenly stops, realizing he has inadvertently moved along the Venom Clan's route. He curses under his breath. He tells her that he made a mistake and decides to head the other way. She affirms, telling him to be careful. His thoughts drift back to the Venom Clan's plot. He wonders who within their ranks is high enough to want to sacrifice Princess Marissa. The question lingers in his mind. Unable to contain his curiosity, Christian approaches Marissa cautiously, as he asks her a blunt question. He mentions that she is an illegitimate daughter and wonders if she is hated at home. Marissa's expression darkens instantly, and she snaps back, calling him the worst, thinking that he's ridiculing her. Realizing his mistake, Christian thinks that he didn't mean it like that. He had just blurted it out without thinking. He reflects internally, recalling that in his past life, he wasn't even treated like a person at home. He acknowledges that he crossed a line and, with genuine regret, tries to apologize if his words sounded rude. But a blade speeds past his face before the words could come out. Seeing the impact on the tree, his face pales. Pointing a venomous finger towards him, she orders him to apologize properly. Chris is taken aback by the events. Christian observes her reaction, noting that her fury doesn't seem like it comes from a simple family feud. He deduces that there must be something deeper behind her hostility. He thinks to himself that he needs to uncover the real motive of the one orchestrating this scheme. Until then, he realizes, Marissa will remain in danger. Even if she joins the Venom Clan's expedition, her survival is uncertain. That for now, until reinforcements arrive, they just have to buy time. Chris then accuses her of breaking the rules, pointing out that she struck first. He argued that because of this violation, the Dark Clan should rightfully claim the relic. Marissa's voice, seething with resentment, declares that for insulting their family and considering the disgrace she had to endure after the broken engagement, this is self-defense and she will not let the matter slide. The words carry a sharp edge of vengeance. Before he could react, she threw the poison bottles at him. Smoke covers him from all sides. Soon he gets on his knees and starts coughing violently. With his skin turning black and blue, Marissa asks how he likes her blue moon. She states that with just a signal, it'll explode and venom will rush through his veins. So she orders him to apologize. No, she tells him to beg for his life. She keeps throwing more poison at him to force him. He is Sue, covered in green smoke. But suddenly a hand comes out, reaching for Marissa. Then Chris emerges fully cured, holding her close in his arms as she's taken aback completely. He tells her finally that he's afraid he can't do that. A radiant blue aura surged from Chris as he grabbed Marissa's arm. He told her they didn't call her the little venom witch for nothing. Still stunned, she barely reacted when he added that he'd heard it burns like hell until it gets detoxified. She yanked her hand away, insisting that wasn't possible. Only she carried the antidote to her own poison. Chris responded by asking if she'd ever heard of the Divine Healer clan. He explained that he'd taken some inspiration from them and managed to whip something up on his own. Just as he was mulling over what to name his concoction, Marissa interrupted him, asking what on earth he was talking about. But before she could say another word, he gave her a good ol' neck chop. She collapsed, consciousness slipping away. Chris caught her before she hit the ground and whispered that she should rest, promising he'd save her no matter what. Chris had tied her to a tree. Chris then retrieved her communication amulet, held it for a moment, and used it to send a message to her team. When the scene shifted to them, the team received the message and read it with wide eyes. Confusion spread among them. The command was unexpected. It told them to scout the cliffs on the opposite side of their current position. Back with Chris, he grinned with satisfaction. He cheered, saying now he wouldn't have to deal with any turds from the Venom clan. Meanwhile, across the rugged terrain, a lone figure sped forward like a bolt of fury. It was Chris. As he moved, he spoke to himself, claiming that relics infused with demonic or celestial power had either been buried for centuries or had recently descended from the heavens, as if daring lesser beings to claim them. He believed that the relic discovered this time was most likely the Twilight Amulet. According to the Fox, Lena, this artifact had been dismissed for years because of its unpredictable nature, until the Marquis finally deciphered its usage after 2 years of research. That very success had gotten the old man killed. Chris declared to himself that he wouldn't let that happen again. Not in this life, not when the destruction of the world was at stake. Then he noticed something. A small disturbance. He dropped from a tree, scanned the area, and noticed a damaged leaf. His eyes narrowed as he spotted footprints in the demon zone, a place no one was supposed to inhabit. Relics didn't grow legs, so clearly someone had beaten him here. Still cloaked by invisibility, Chris crept closer and listened to the voices of 3 individuals nearby. The one in the center spat insults, calling someone worms. Chris analyzed from a distance. The man in the middle radiated energy from the Venom clan and was definitely a 4-star. The woman next to him? She was stronger, probably 5-star. But the last man? Something was off. He didn't carry any Venom clan energy. All his cores were murky. The mysterious newcomer cursed Marissa, blaming her for everything and stating bluntly that the world would be better off if she just dropped dead. Chris concluded that the speaker was likely a direct heir of the Venom clan. And all of this chaos stemmed from the ongoing succession war. The rogue heir questioned whether they should just wipe out all the other participants. The supposed heir agreed. It would be cleaner, especially since they'd already promised the relic. When one of the group wondered what might be inside the box they carried, the younger one snapped that it was none of their concern. The box was destined for Marquis Langham. All they had to do was deal with Marissa. With that, he ordered them to feed her to the ants, and they vanished into the forest without delay. Now only one person remained behind. Chris observed him. It was the dumbest looking of the trio, and also a 4-star. He figured he could probably take him out directly but saw no reason to make it harder than it needed to be. Instead, Chris began scheming how to grab the relic without raising an alarm. That's when he spotted a group of monkeys in the trees nearby. A wicked grin spread across his face. Just as the lone guard yawned, a massive pile of dung dropped squarely onto his head. Shock and disgust twisted his expression as he realized what had hit him. The monkeys weren't acting on their own. Chris had used his dark energy to stir them into fighting each other. As chaos erupted in the treetops, Chris used the distraction to slip forward and seize the relic box. But he wasn't done yet. With a smirk, he pulled out a unique pendant. He hadn't expected to ever use it. It was a summoning stone gifted to him, capable of storing beasts up to grade 4. He activated it, forming a small spatial rift. Reaching inside, he pulled out another box, nearly identical to the original. He had taken the second-hand container Luna had given him and carefully refurbished it until it looked brand new. Without hesitation, he swapped the real relic for the fake and tucked the genuine box away. But when he opened it to peek inside, his eyes widened. It was not the Twilight amulet. Sometime later, Marissa stirred, groggy and disoriented. She looked down at her bindings and tried to make sense of her situation, wondering just what the hell was going on. That's when Marissa remembered her encounter with Chris. The thought alone reignited her fury. Her frustration bubbled over into childish outbursts. After all, he didn't even apologize and then pulled something like this on her. She began ranting aloud, asking how he could treat her like this, questioning if she was some kind of joke to him. But then a voice cut through her tirade, calling out specifically for her. It was Merlin, demanding to know if she truly was the princess of the Venom clan. Startled, Marissa stared at her and asked who she really was. The scene then shifted to a different location. There, Jupian examined the antidote she got. One of the guards nearby questioned why she had taken the pills from Chris. Even Jupian herself was unsure why she had trusted him in the first place. Another team member reported that the area had been thoroughly searched and cleared. Jupian turned to her assistant and asked whether the far side was still being scouted. He confirmed it was, adding that the search party was making its way in their direction. Still, he expressed concern about Chris's well-being. Jupian began playing out scenarios in her mind but ultimately reminded herself that Chris had gone off on his own. What more could she have done? If he dies, he has no one to blame but himself. That's when someone ran up to her and announced that the relic had been found. As they handed her the box, she remarked that it had taken longer than expected, but at least they had beaten the Venom clan to it. With the mission now complete, she ordered everyone to regroup at Lunka's Canyon. As the group prepared to move the relic, someone remarked that since they found the relic before the Venom clan, that should mean that it's their win, right? She doesn't reply. Instead, Jupian couldn't help but think of Chris. Was he still alive? She decided to send squads 1 and 2 to stay behind and search for him. One of the members protested, cursing Chris and asking why they should even bother. Jupian reminded them that despite how much of a pain he was still blood from a main house. Even if all they found was his corpse, they needed to bring it back. But before they could move, a massive explosion erupted from one of the nearby mountains. At the same time, the cliffs behind them began to collapse. Panic spread. One of the team members asked what the hell was going on as they realized all of their escape paths had been cut off. Jupian quickly commanded everyone to stay alert. They were under attack. Suddenly, blue flowers began to bloom and cover their bodies. From above, cloaked figures watched in silence as the team collapsed one by one. A woman among them said it was over, revealing that she had used the blue flower, Marissa's ultimate poison. She claimed to have stolen it from Marissa's lab so the suspicion would fall squarely on her shoulders. Descending from her perch, she thought to herself that launching this ambush so close to the Dark Clan's outpost was risky, but wiping them out now was the cleanest solution. Her next move was to plant the relic inside Marissa's lab. She believed her work here was done. But just then, a dagger hurtled toward her with blinding speed. She parried at the nick of time. Jupian commented that she must be the poison maga and asserted that this is against the rules of the competition. The woman is shocked that she's not dead since the blue flower is something that can never be cured by the Dark Clan's medicine. Hearing this, Jupian wonders if it's a special poison and how did she manage to neutralize that. That's when she recalled the medicine bottle Chris gave her. The woman unsheathed a poison-laced weapon. She said she had no choice but to kill Jupian herself, mocking her by claiming that even if she were at full strength, she still wouldn't be a challenge. Jupian assessed the attacker and realized she had to be at least a 5-star demon. The betrayal hit hard. She couldn't believe Marissa would go this far. The veiled woman declared she would end it quickly and charged forward, but just as she was about to land a fatal strike, she had to leap aside. Needles rained down in her path. Marissa had arrived, accompanied by Merlin. The veiled woman was stunned. She couldn't understand how Marissa had made it here, especially after ordering her mole to guide her to the canyons. Then her eyes locked onto Merlin and a tinge of fear appeared. She was the vice captain of the Black Swamp Knights. Merlin praised Marissa, saying she had made an impressive time. Marissa snapped at the veiled woman, accusing her of having the audacity to try to frame her using her technique. She demanded that the woman reveal herself and affiliation. The only response was a dismissive order to know her place. With a flick of her wrist, the woman summoned her backup. Merlin assessed the situation, counting 2 3-star and 1 5-star fighter on the enemy side. She noted that they were clearly outmatched. Jupian concluded that whoever orchestrated this had planned it knowing their expedition lacked high-level fighters. At this rate, they were all going to die. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the top of the cliff. Chris appeared, casually stating that running into them like this was a crazy coincidence. Jupian and Marissa looked up, both stunned to see him. He wore a smug expression, as if everything was finally falling into place. Chris observed the chaos below and figured they must have really missed him. Jupian quickly disagreed, while Marissa told him they needed to talk later. The cloaked enemy sneered, mocking their little reunion and telling them it was all very touching, just in time for them to die. She claimed that no one stood a chance just because some weakling showed up. Marissa gritted her teeth. As much as she wanted to reject what the woman said, deep down she knew it was true. Once someone reached 5 stars, their entire being transformed. It was like a snake shedding its skin. Even the 4 of them combined wouldn't be able to take her down. Chris scoffed and said she was getting cocky for someone who was merely 5-star. As he reached into a glowing portal, he remarked that only an idiot would come up with such a sloppy plan. He called out to the others and tossed down 3 artifacts, telling them to catch. Jupian and Merlin recognized them instantly, but Marissa stood frozen, stunned by what she saw. One of the artifacts was unmistakably hers. Chris noticed her expression and asked if she didn't want it. Her face made it obvious she didn't know how to react. But then something unexpected happened. Jupian began to overflow with mana, her body trembling from the surge. She shouted about how powerful she felt, overwhelmed by the boost. Chris smirked, thinking to himself that maybe he had overdone it, just a bit. Merlin had received the best relic among them, but activating it was another matter entirely. A flashback revealed that Chris had sent her a personal note. In it, he warned that certain factions were targeting the expedition and that he had prepared a relic specifically for her. He instructed her to assist Marissa and her team and even included the activation method for the artifact. Someone from her unit had asked where Chris even found something like this, to which he casually replied that he had someone wrapped around his finger. He added that he had to make a run for it now. Upon hearing that, Merlin had declared that Chris still owed her a duel once everything was over. Chris had agreed and told them all not to die before bidding them goodbye. Marissa had asked if he wasn't going to fight alongside them, but when she looked again, he was already gone. She had been about to curse him under her breath when Jupian interjected, saying that Chris likely had a plan. Marissa noticed the gleam in her eyes and wondered why Jupian was defending him, and more importantly, why she looked like she was daydreaming. Meanwhile, the arrogant cloaked woman scoffed at their preparations, claiming that a few trinkets wouldn't save them. She released a wave of poison energy, and Jupian tensed up. The woman was using dark energy, a brutal force only 5-star elites could control. Merlin stepped forward, leveling her swords at the enemy. She said that Chris once told her rank alone didn't decide battles. Arrogance was often the real downfall. Jupian agreed, adding that she always wanted to crush people who relied solely on brute strength. With that, Merlin declared herself the lead attacker and charged in. Jupian nudged Marissa, telling her to gear up, but Marissa still stared in disbelief at the frog-shaped relic in her hands. With no better option, she finally put on the headband, steeling herself. Jupian, ready to unleash, challenged the others to a bet. Who would take down their opponent first? Merlin claimed the cloaked woman as her target. Their conversation clearly irritated the enemy, who retaliated with a barrage of poison needles. Merlin blocked them effortlessly. But the woman, with superior mana control, quickly got behind her and landed a strike that knocked Merlin back. Merlin managed to block it with her sword. The woman remained composed and widened the distance between them before unleashing a fresh assault. Her attacks struck true, drawing blood. Enraged, the cloaked woman spat insults, calling her a bug and mocking the Black Swamp Knights as useless. Though visibly nervous, Merlin taunted back, asking if she was sure she was really 5-star, because her attacks felt more like a mosquito bite. Infuriated, the woman lunged. And that's when Merlin caught her by the face and released a curse directly into her. The cloaked woman couldn't believe it. A mere 4-star curse was affecting her. Merlin explained that the artifact not only boosted her strength, but also amplified her blood-linked curse power. Now paralyzed, the enemy realized too late that Merlin had taken the earlier hit on purpose. Without delay, Merlin finished her off. Seeing their leader fall, the enemy subordinates froze. Jupian, in the meantime, had already taken down her own opponent with ruthless efficiency. Elsewhere, Chris stood on a rocky ledge, calling out to the final 5-star enemy. He asked if the man planned to ambush him or was simply too scared to show himself. His voice was mocking, confident. The cloaked figure emerged, and Chris smirked, finally laying eyes on him. He called out, saying he had been wondering why the man's core was so murky. Since it didn't match Venom Clan energy, he suspected there was another agenda at play. Chris picked up a stone and hurled it at incredible speed. It grazed the man's mask. More stones followed in rapid succession. Though most were dodged, one struck the mask, cracking it. Chris commented on his opponent's subtle tells, how his shoulder twitched when tense, how his vision narrowed under distraction. He said those were rookie habits, and he called him out by name, Brother Asht. The mask came off. A flashback revealed the truth. Asht's father had told him the Venom clan would eliminate Marissa and Jupian, but if Chris managed to escape, Asht would be responsible for hunting him down. No loose ends were allowed. But things hadn't gone according to plan. Jupian's unit wasn't wiped out. Worse, Merlin had joined the fray. Killing Chris now could lead to a political fallout. He wouldn't be able to avoid suspicions since he wasn't in the clan, and it might even implicate Asht's father. Chris asked why he was suddenly so quiet. Was he afraid? Asht didn't answer. Instead, he summoned a dark, demonic energy and forged a massive sword, its aura thick with malice. Chris broke a sweat. The energy was suffocating. Asht launched his first strike, but Chris countered with one of his own. Then, multiple clones appeared, all attacking at once. Chris was shocked. Asht had created demonic clones. He grudgingly acknowledged that Asht hadn't become a young lord by sheer luck. Struggling to fend off the onslaught, Chris realized something was off. Asht was likely using illusions to mask a surprise attack. Preparing himself, Chris charged forward, clashing blade against blade. But even that was a fake. Behind him, the real Asht readied a devastating blow. The impact shook the entire cliffside, rubble flying and smoke clouding the area. Chris was struck down. Half the terrain had been split clean from the attack. But then Asht heard something that made him pause, Chris's voice. Through the dust, Chris stood up, wielding the true black sword. With a simple swing, Chris unleashed a wave so powerful it shattered through Asht's triple-layered dark energy defense. The blade cracked straight through, leaving Asht severely injured. On the ground, Asht seethed. He couldn't believe he was being humiliated by a branch family brat. Rage overtook him, but the fight wasn't over yet. Chris told Asht to accept defeat quietly. He said that if Asht surrendered, he would keep the incident buried. There was no need to trouble the Marquis or stir up a family feud. It wasn't worth it. Asht's eyes widened. The realization hit him hard. Chris had known about the plan all along. That meant Chris had to die. But Asht also knew he was in no condition to win now. That's why he will need to aim for the next opportunity. He responded with a calm expression, thanking Chris for saving his reputation. But the handshake that followed betrayed his intent. Chris tightened his grip, and dark demonic energy flared between them. Before Asht could react, Chris crushed his core in a single, brutal pulse of energy. Chris told him the thanks were unnecessary. It had all been fake. Finished with his business, Chris turned and dashed back toward his team, annoyed that the fight had lasted longer than he expected. He wondered how long the others had been fighting when a voice called his name. 3 familiar faces, his own chaotic trio of JoJo waifus, rushed toward him. From their expressions alone, Chris knew he was doomed. He muttered that they shouldn't come any closer, it was too overwhelming. Marissa shouted that it was all because of the artifact he gave her. Merlin chimed in, saying they had completed the orders he left behind. Chris asked what happened to the Poison Masters. Merlin responded that they had been incinerated completely, turned to ash, no trace left behind. Marissa looked like she had something to say but held back, biting her tongue. Jupian broke the silence, asking where Chris had disappeared to. Chris claimed that he was just scouting around. He added, completely unconvincingly, that nobles like him shouldn't be seen in direct combat anyway. Marissa scoffed and asked why he looked injured then. She pressed further, asking if more Venom clan traitors had been involved. Chris avoided her gaze and told them all to retreat. He figured he'd dealt with the worst of it a bit farther from the main battlefield on purpose. By now, anyone still breathing should have either run or been retrieved. He meant what he said. He truly planned to stay silent. Exposing everything would only drag the Marquis into a scandal. Besides, he now had the stolen insignia of the Constellation and 3 key survivors. That was more than enough. 1 week later, Chris was laid out at a table overflowing with food. Thanks to what happened, the Venom clan had been thrown into disarray. Under pressure, they settled the matter with a mutual agreement and compensated money, mainly because Chris had proof of Marquis Langham and Ashid's involvement. It was still a better ending than in his previous life, where the entire expedition had been wiped out. And at least this time, Duke Wham didn't have to surrender the demon's amulet to the Marquis. After the canyon incident, Merlin had quietly returned to the Dark Clan's camp. Marissa had promised to stay silent about Merlin's involvement and slipped away. Now, back in the present, Marie was attempting to spoon-feed Chris like a stubborn toddler. Chris, groaning, said his entire body ached too much to eat. Marie pouted, claiming that hearing him in pain broke her heart. She daydreamed aloud, declaring that no matter what, she'd feed him, clothe him, and take care of him like a proper housewife. Chris physically recoiled, unnerved by her sincerity and the phrase, her heart beating. Marie insisted it wasn't a joke. She said that every time she saw him, her heart pounded wildly. To prove it, she vibrated her whole body like an overexcited squirrel. Then, without waiting for permission, She shoved a spoonful of food into Chris's mouth, saying he needed a balanced diet to stay healthy. Jupian sat silently across from them while Marie cooed that the food was filled with her love. Chris, trying to shift the awkwardness, turned to Jupian and asked how long she planned to stay since she hadn't fully recovered herself. Jupian replied that she'd leave once she finished monitoring his recovery. Her cheeks turned red as she mumbled that she was technically in charge. Marie threw a fit, saying this behavior would give Chris indigestion. Marie called Jupian out, saying she had guts to be openly flirting with him. Then, Marie tried to scare her off by offering to bring Chris a drink. She smugly suggested blood juice. Jupian turned it down, saying she preferred scallop juice instead. That threw Maria off completely. It wasn't her specialty. As Jupian kept quietly staring at Chris, he asked if she had something to say. She told him flatly that she hated him and would crush him one day. Chris made a smug face and said he looked forward to it. But Jupian suddenly blushed and, almost whispering, thanked him for saving her. Chris, stunned, asked her to repeat herself, pretending not to hear. That annoyed her, and she snapped that it didn't matter. She was simply acknowledging what he did. Then, her tone shifted. She said his grin wouldn't last long. The Marquis had made a promise. Chris would soon be officially named a duke. Once that happened, everything would change. She warned him to be ready. Chris understood exactly what she meant. Until now, no one considered him worth the trouble. But once he gained noble status, he would become a target. Asheed would recover and come for him. The first princess, who hid more than anyone knew, would make her move. The youngest son, the third son, even the mad prince. They'd all be after him. It wouldn't be like before, and he wondered, would Jupian be one of them? Then, as if reading his mind, she suddenly asked if he thought she was pretty. The question came out of nowhere. Chris was too stunned to answer. When he said nothing, she stood up, said she would take her leave, and exited the room. Chris let out a long sigh of relief, finally alone. He muttered that he just needed some peace and a bite of food. But his moment of calm was shattered by a familiar voice. He turned, annoyed, thinking that it was Jupian, but no, it was Marissa. Marissa entered a grand hall. Blossoms trailed behind her like whispers of magic, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Her presence was disruptive. Chris's voice called her name. She asked if he was all right. She tried to hold her composure, though her trembling lips betrayed her. Chris watched from a distance, offering a sheepish, so-so, beneath his calm, frustration simmered. He questioned why she was here again. Was she trying to start an argument over being tied up earlier? Breaking the silence, she told him her father wanted to see him. Her tone was neutral, but laced with restraint. Duke Wam. The Demon Lord. The Poison Clan leader, a terrifying 8-star demon lord. Chris silently wondered why a figure of such authority had summoned him. Later, Chris and Marissa walked side by side beneath the high arches of a grand hallway. Their footsteps echoed with unresolved tension. She asked how he had known about the assassination plot. He answered plainly that he had an informant. She paused, absorbing the information. She recalled her interaction with Merlin, vice captain of the Black Swamp Knight Order. A flashback revealed how she had infiltrated the expedition under Master Christian's direct orders. Marissa repeated the word, infiltrated, with disbelief. She pressed her. Was she acknowledging that Christian had broken expedition rules? Her voice sharpened. Merlin replied. She revealed that the young master had ordered the Dark Poison clan to stay back and face the rival faction. The words stunned her, slipping out as a shaken, "What?" Inside the palace, she confronted him again. If he knew, why hadn't he warned her? Why tie her up? Chris responded solemnly. He said he feared she'd become a target. If the deadly Poison clan was behind the ambush, then as heir, she would have been in danger. Her tone softened. He hadn't suspected her after all. She admitted that she owed him, a confession that landed heavily in the quiet space between them. Marissa, for the first time, thanked him for saving the expedition. He answered quietly, saying she was important to him. The words caught her off guard. She blinked, cheeks flushing, unsure what to make of it. Breaking her trance, he suggested a political alliance. The words rushed out, ruining the mood. Marissa paused. The proposal surprised her. He asked what she thought. He acknowledged that this was awkward because of their past engagement. He quickly clarified that she has nothing to worry about, it had nothing to do with their past. He assured her this wasn't about reigniting anything or dodging any engagement, just politics. Unaware of her inner turmoil, he asserts with a smile that they are complete strangers now. He screamed for her to believe him. An awkward silence stretched between them. Totally clueless, Chris asks why she isn't saying anything. She glares at him like a banshee, causing him to gasp. Marissa glared, with clenched fists, and agreed to the alliance for the sake of their families. Chris was stunned. He questioned what he'd said to provoke such formality. Soon after they arrive at the office, as she enters, Marissa announces that she brought Chris, addressing him as Patriarch. They stood before Duke Wam. The Demon Lord greeted Marissa with calm appreciation, congratulating her on her performance. The Duke's eyes moistened, reminding hers he had promised to call him Dad, not Patriarch. Unshaken, she replied that they were in front of guests, and he needed to control himself. With a smile, he admitted he had overreacted. Switching gears, the Duke invited her to dinner. He mentioned venison, her favorite, had been prepared. She accepted tersely and excused herself. As she walked away, Chris watched in silence, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. He noted to himself that they seemed to have a good relationship. He never expected the Duke to be such a doting father. Marissa paused in the hallway, unreadable. Inside, Chris approached Duke Wam, offering a respectful greeting. The Duke nodded, remarking that Chris had matured, just as the rumors said. Then the air thickened. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the Duke said that if he thought too long about what Chris had done to their princess, he might feel tempted to rip him apart. His energy surged, but he suppressed it quickly. He added that Chris's intervention had spared Marissa from serious harm, and because of that, he would overlook this incident. His words were final. Chris, tense but calm, asked why he had been summoned. The Duke shifted tone and asked what Chris's relationship with the medical clan was. The question blindsided him. Referencing past testimony, the Duke reminded him that he had claimed to acquire medicine via auction. Yet, Duke Wam stated that he personally monitored all black market trades, and Chris's claim didn't add up. Chris silently exhaled, then with a straight face said that made it himself, because he was a genius. The Duke asks if he really thinks that makes any sense. He has to understand everything about the poison in order to make an antidote. That is common sense. Chris asserted that a genius can easily grasp that just by reading books. The Duke laughed and said that it's not like he committed a crime, so he can't really interrogate him. Chris sighs in relief, then says if the misunderstanding is cleared up, could he leave now? But the Duke had one last matter. He leaned forward and asked, evenly, how Chris felt about becoming someone of the Dark Poison clan. Scene shift. In a lavish, red-lit chamber, Marchioness Frisia, known as the Scarlet Snowflake, stood like a blade unsheathed. She demanded answers from the Marquis. Her voice was furious, trembling. She said she'd heard Prince Eshid's core had shattered, and asked if this was Christian's doing. The Marquis, calm and unshaken, ordered her to lower her voice. She stepped closer, venom in her words. She questioned if the brute was truly becoming heir. She declared it a disgrace to the Dark Clan's legacy. She asked if the Marquis would really allow this. He didn't answer. Instead, she said maybe things had worked out for the best. Both he and Eshid had failed. Frisia's eyes narrowed. She said coldly that she would handle that brute herself. Then reminded him sharply. The first prince's position belonged to her Myzik. It wasn't his to fight for anymore. He stared, then relented. He told her to do as she wished. As he turned away, his voice faded, emotionless. He said he wouldn't interfere. This is the end of season 1 of this manhwa. The series is probably going on hiatus. I will continue when season 2 resumes. Thanks for watching. Make sure you like and comment if you liked the recap.